All right. Welcome to a very, very special interview that we're going to be doing today. It's not your normal one. We're recording one. We haven't done one of these, I think, in about 4 years, but as schedules worked out, this is the best format for us to do it. And it's going to be a very interesting chat. I've got a pair of collectors who have been in the hobby for more than 40 years. And that's longer than I think probably we've ever had any single person in the hobby to talk to. And here we have a pair of brothers who've been doing this together. So let me bring Neil and Leigh Mechem into the chat, and let's talk a bit, gentlemen. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bill. Nice to be here. And I appreciate you mentioning how old we've gotten.
Yeah. Not that it's a secret now we're on camera.
No,
but,
true.
Well, you could have started when you were 10. You might both be in your early 50s. You never know, right?
Fortunately, not anymore. But yes, we got started in pretty much the mid to late 70s as far as comics and whatnot were concerned, and more so in the late 70s for art. But in the early stages there, we got going with some sketches and a few other odds and ends. Gradually got into getting our first pages and whatnot, but we got in like everybody else through collecting comics primarily.
And being up in Canada too, then a lot of the artists as guests at the comic shows, they didn't bring any art with them. You could get a con sketch, but actual pages were almost, you just couldn't find anything at all. So it was a tough, well, between that and being broke all the time, it was tough to get the collection going, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's good. I think the other thing that comes up for us a lot too, because we've been at it a long time, is people say, well, why didn't you just buy everything when it was cheaper? Well, it's disproportionately more expensive now, that's true, but it doesn't mean that you had infinite amounts of money when you're in your teens back in the 70s and 80s. So we bought what we could afford, but it meant left other things that we just didn't have any money for by the time the show was done.
Yeah, I mean, we used to tie bus fare up in a handkerchief and stick it in our back pocket so we wouldn't spend it, because we simply spent everything else we had.
Yeah. So when you talk about the prices now versus what they were then, yes, it's an issue, but it doesn't mean you could just do whatever you want to do. But,
one other thing probably should to share with everybody is that Neil and I, we collect together, but we don't live in the same place either. So our collection is split, and we do an art rotation once a year where we swap holdings. So it's a little bit of an adventure, but that's been exciting too.
So now what we do is we just buy pieces that are right size for the gap that you're going to swap it into. Something.
And if we sell something, we have to sell two, just to even it up.
Interesting. But so and I've met some people who collect that way. Not many, but I know a couple other brothers that do that, and even some close friends who collect in that manner as well. But do either of you have pieces that are strictly your piece, or do you always buy with the intention that it's a mutual decision to pick up a piece?
We do have a few that are individually owned, but most of the stuff is a joint portion of the collection. We don't really have any totally divergent tastes such that one person really likes something and the other doesn't. So we're generally okay with that. Anything that one of us figures is worth buying, we both will. But yes, we do own a few pieces individually. They rotate as well, though, so we do work
around. So.
Well, how did that work in the early days? If Neil, if you had more money than Leigh, you kicked in 3/4 and you put in 1/4, and then the next time around it worked the opposite way?
It did initially, but what we would do is even it up as time went along in terms of so that it was a 100% split, or sorry, a 50-50 split between the two. So we did.
There are a few pieces that we'll probably end up seeing a little later in the fantasy art side that are just Neil's, and that was more just he had the money at the time. Yeah.
Well, fortunately, we've never had a surplus of money, so it's never really been an issue to. But one of the comments people do make sometimes, though, is they say, well, what happens if one of you really wants it and one doesn't? Well, that hasn't really emerged as a problem, but it doesn't really matter because we could buy pieces individually and they'd just be part of the collection, knowing one person owns it.
Sure. I guess the only, the other question I'd have for you is how do you kind of determine who gets to keep what at any given time? I mean, if you know that it's time to give up the Burn X-Men piece, for instance, does the other brother know what piece they want to get back in return when they have to give that piece up, or how do you make that kind of decision?
Well, what we did, and this is something that we've been sort of going back and forth with over time, is how to sort of display the art. We did have it in portfolios and found that we weren't looking at it often enough. So we started to play around with different options. We got some sleeves and backing boards. We kind of had them propped up for display, and that way we could take them down again. But eventually it evolved into getting them framed and getting them on the walls so that you're kind of, well, basically you're living with your art, which we've found is a lot more satisfying. So we've got the collection fundamentally split and roughly evenly in terms of comic art, fantasy art, and other types of pieces. And now it's just kind of a wholesale swap once a year. We kind of carefully but gently load up the car a few times and go back and forth and rehang the new version.
But if it comes to parting with something, then generally we've discussed it far enough in advance that we know that we're comfortable doing it. So if we're selling pieces that are communal, then it comes back into a communal pot, and we can either split it between us or we can buy something else with it, which quite often happens. Otherwise, if it belongs to one or the other, then it's strictly a sale of saying, okay, I'm going to sell that. That one's mine. Money comes into me, and then we've got a gap on the wall to either fill or plaster over, whichever is going to be suitable there. Luckily, so far, it hasn't really come to it where one of us really wants to let go of a piece that the other doesn't, or really wants to acquire something that the other one doesn't. So it hasn't really been an issue.
So when you say a wholesale swap, do you really, everything's changed?
Yeah,
absolutely everything.
Yeah.
So there's so it's not like 10 pieces are going back and forth.
No.
Everything that each. All right, then that makes it easy. There's no.
It's a yearly event now. So we have done partial swaps in the past when we were still accumulating pieces on a more regular basis, and it was easier then because we've only just gotten something, so we've only had it for a couple of months. Now that we're slowed down considerably in terms of the number of pieces that are coming in, it is a once a year complete swap. So so it's been good. So
as far as art purchasing goes, is one of you a better haggler than the other? And so, one does the deals with a particular dealer, or how do you make a determination on, if you're looking at a piece that's, say, at a signature auction at Heritage, do you decide what your limits are before you go into it? And, how does that work?
Yeah, well, for the most part, with an auction there, then we sit down and we think, okay, well, hang on, what's our max on that thing, and what can we manage, and and look at each other and go, okay, and would we go up one if we have to, sort of thing. But so that's easy enough to kind of do. If we're standing at somebody's table, at OX or whatever, then I think we're probably pretty equal on the haggling front. Yes. We with the comics, we used to really upset the wife of one of our favorite dealers there, because she said, "Oh no, it's them again. I feel like I'm falling on the dissecting table," because we would kind of go, "Well,
No, that part hasn't really been a problem so far. We've been okay there. The joint aspect of collecting has never been an issue for us. I know it freaks a lot of other people out that they don't think they could make it work, but for us, it's never been a concern. But speaking of which, we should perhaps get into a couple of pieces that we show here. So,
right, and but I just want to say though, it's amazing. I think having somebody that you can share the hobby with in the way that you both have been able to do so in the 40 plus years that you've been collecting, I think is a wonderful journey to be on. I mean, it's something that we have, especially early on. You think about the time you started collecting in the late 70s, no internet. Dealers are sending faxes around, with sheets of lists of art for sale. Collectors really didn't have the ability to communicate, you guys really had something special.
Yeah, and our auction catalogs always came about 3 days later than everybody else.
But yes, like you said, let's take a look at some of the artwork that you've supplied today. So I know we're going to start off with a couple Byrne X-Men pages.
Yeah. Now, technically, the first actual pieces we bought were con sketches, but these are the first pages of actual original art in terms of published art that we bought. We met Byrne and Terry Austin at Cosmican Con in '79 here in the Toronto area. At that time, pages were considerably cheaper than they are now, but Byrne was asking around $40 a page, which was reasonable, but it was kind of substantial for the time. So we ended up getting 2 pages from him for $75 for the pair, which seems kind of grotesquely cheap now, but at the time that was actually a reasonable amount of money.
And it was kind of nice to be able to buy them directly from Byrne with Austin there, got them to sign them for us. And So that was exciting.
Yeah. Now that one we still have. The second one we're going to see we let go of to a fellow CAF member a number of years ago, which again was a tough decision to make, but over the number of years we'd had it, we kind of figured we were ready for it. This I always loved as a great page. That transformation scene of Colossus in the middle there, I think, is just great stuff. Hey, no getting ahead.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I was trying to click and I advanced. No, very memorable page, right? I mean, you know, Proteus was one of my favorite storylines from the Claremont, Byrne, and Austin run as well. This is fantastic.
I loved Austin's handling of the metallic look on Colossus. He really nailed that nicely.
Yeah, it was great work. Yeah, it's a little unusual, I realize, for people to hold on to things as long as we have in some cases, but we've been fortunate in that regard that we have stuff now that we would never be able to buy if we were going to, you know, have to look at doing it today. It just wouldn't be feasible. But those two worked out really well for us, and those are the first two actual pages that we bought.
Well, that's wonderful. I can say that I never have had the opportunity or the pleasure to meet Derry. So, and I regret that. Yeah, I've seen John at a few shows, never spoke with him, but that would have been great to see the two of them together.
Yeah, and we're getting to the stage now where a lot of these guys are getting up there in years, as are the rest of us, and a lot of them are gone now too, unfortunately. So it makes sense. Now, we did also get 2 sketches from John Byrne. Not entirely sure if we got these at the same show or if it might have been later. But we did get 2 from him. They're actually 2 pieces. It's not one.
We ganged them up just to save a little time here, but
trying to save space.
Yeah. Well, when we got the sketches in there, and he was putting the blacks on with this really big fat black magic marker, and we're watching it starting to bleed, and we're kind of going, "Oh no, stop!"
Where it bled for like a couple of weeks afterwards. But
well, I'm sure he didn't, and that's funny because you know, I'm a huge John Byrne fan myself, and I can't say that I've seen that done too often. So maybe he only did it once and realized it was the wrong marker to use and the wrong paper.
Well, if everybody's got a nice black area on their Byrne sketch, they can maybe thank us.
The paper is quite porous, which was more of a problem than anything. But at that time, then con sketches are closer to now what they would call commissions. Guy would spend 15-20 minutes doing a con sketch, and it looked very much like their art. Now, some of the scribbles from people, it could be anybody. Not to say that some aren't well done as well, but it's a bit different. But those were 2 of the earlier ones, but possibly not the actual early ones that we have. We have a couple coming up that I think we might have gotten slightly ahead of that.
So those are 2 Adams sketches, and that was there was another comic shop in Toronto that had Neil Adams early on, and it's like, you know, he was a god, and you know, it was amazing. And they said up front that there wouldn't be any signing at the show, but the day before, the Saturday, you could come down with five comics to get signed by Neil at the shop, and then at the show there wouldn't be any signings. And so we didn't know really what to expect when we got to the show, but we were sort of sniffing around trying to figure out where he was going to show up, and so was everybody else, and we kind of started forming this line outside this closed door that we were pretty sure was going to be where he was going to be. And yeah, we were fortunate that we got in line and got 2 sketches, and he only ended up doing about 5 sketches, and then he had to go for a panel, and that was it. So we felt really fortunate.
It was a little scary at the time, though, because we had never seen anybody do it quite this way. But he got out a pencil and he sort of waved it over the page, and then he put it down and picked up the marker, and we thought, oh no, this is going to be terrible.
And
but it was like magic watching him finish these figures off. It was great.
And we were typically paying in around the $10 mark for con sketches at the time, and Neil Adams was asking $25 for the sketches, and we were going, you know, when we saw that pencil put down, we were thinking, oh, it's not going to be $25.
But it was interesting too, though, because he had 2 options. You could pay $15 and get less detail, or $25 and get a more detailed sketch, same size and whatnot. So a couple of people opted for the 15. We opted for the 25. I think we were number 3 and 4 in there. But we thought everybody would want Batman, but they didn't. The first guy, I think, wanted Dracula because he had done a couple of Dracula magazine stories. And then the guy after that, I think, wanted Captain America.
Captain America,
yeah. So it was interesting. But,
so did he? You were with him when he was drawing them? I mean, did
yeah.
So you were able to have a conversation with Neil.
Yes, yes, to some extent. I don't really remember it, to be perfectly honest, in terms of what he was talking about. But yeah, he would chat while he was working.
There was a fair number of people behind us and around us too. So I think there was just sort of more general chit chat from other people were asking questions and things like that. So yeah, but it wasn't sort of a one-on-one, but it was personal. And, he was very, very kind.
Yeah, that would have been around 78 or 79. We're not 100% sure exactly. We think it's 79, but yeah, no, that was a lot of fun, but an interesting experience. We weren't quite used to anybody doing the finished work so directly. And then I think we have a couple that we. Oh yes,
that's our Frank Miller sketch.
At one of the shows with Frank Miller there in the early days, he had Daredevil pages for sale, but we just didn't have any money, so we didn't have the 25 or 30 bucks to buy a page, which we now regret, of course. But we did manage to get a sketch out of him, and we figured everybody would want Daredevil. So we thought, well, he'd done those couple of Spider-Man annuals, I think, or special issues or whatever it was. So we thought, well, we'll get Spider-Man. So we did get a Spider-Man sketch out of him.
Spider-Man's our favorite character, and certainly was at the time collecting comics. So yeah, we didn't go for any really oddball requests with artists, but tried not to always go to their kind of their signature character, because you figure they're going to get fed up drawing this thing, day in and day out. So you might get something more interesting if you give them a break.
You hesitate to ask Bill Sienkiewicz for yet another Elektra sketch because you figure he's probably sick of it by now. But if you want Elektra, then you're going to be stuck.
Exactly, and and I get that, because a lot of times they're going to do a similar pose. I mean, there's only so many ways Bill can draw Elektra, like you said, and I think as collectors, we want to try to have a unique piece if we can. So I mean, this is great. I mean, I can't say I've seen a upside down Spider-Man drawn by Frank Miller in this manner before. Yeah, and that's great.
The other part that was a problem in those days is you just had no idea that things were going to go the way they did in the future. You always kind of figured, oh, I'll see this guy at a show again later on. We'll get another one, or we'll get something else or whatever. But that didn't necessarily turn out to be the way it went. Once they became a little more prominent, that was more difficult to do.
Sure. I think there was a couple of garlands.
Now these we actually didn't commission directly; they were pre-done. But you grabbed those. At one of the shows.
We actually had. We're trying to sell off some duplicate comics to raise money for more comics, and so we had a table at this one show. And so Neil sort of manned the table, and I ran over to see if I could get on Jim's commission list. But he was all full; he wasn't doing too many. But he brought a sketchbook with him where he'd already done some pieces that you could look through and pick up. So we were lucky enough to get there early enough on that front to pick up those two sketches and another one of Batman that was quite interesting. The Batman one was fun too. It almost sort of pre-shadowed that lumpy Dark Knight look that some of the people have gone with.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize for people too that these are two separate pieces. We just put them together for the sake of viewing them here. It's not one drawing.
Right, and that's interesting, because even when Starlin was doing commissions when I got started at shows, he wasn't doing them. He was bringing pre-drawn pieces. So in the early 2000s, so clearly he kind of kept the same approach to going to shows. He probably didn't like sketching at shows, so he would just do these pieces in advance.
It's unfortunate more people didn't do it, or at least the ones that we saw, because it's always nicer in a way to pick up an existing piece that you can look at and say, yeah, I love it, as opposed to, am I going to love it when it's done? It's not a guarantee that you get the perfect drawing when somebody's going to do it at the show. But those worked out very well for us, and they were all in the 10 to 15 bucks zone. Yeah, so that was pretty decent.
And I can sympathize with the artists too, not wanting everybody staring over their shoulder as they try and pull off yet another Batman.
I wouldn't want to do it, but one brief aside to put the price perspective in here, though. At that time, minimum wage was a relatively new concept here, and it was about $1.22 an hour for part-time, where it took a while to add up 20 bucks worth of money to buy a sketch.
Especially when you're only getting 3 or 4 hours a week at your job. You
had to work at it.
Yeah.
Well, I like these a lot. I mean, you can see Jim's. I mean, I love Jim's work as well. But these are fantastic. And again, you don't see too many of these, at least on CAF, right? I mean, they're from this era. they're just not in many collectors' hands. So this is
for us. It has two-pronged value. One is that the art to us is very representative of the artist and that time, and the second is they're wonderful mementos of having gone through the shows and going to that period and being excited about getting into it. It was it's got a lot of value that way. That's why with most of the sketches, even though we've had some inquiries, we typically haven't let go of many of them because they do have a lot of personal meaning to us.
Agreed. And that's, again, we talk about that a lot on the channel as far as one of the best things about our hobby is the interaction you get to have with the creator.
Yes.
Especially for a con sketch, or even if you're buying, a published piece from them at the show, there's a takeaway that you don't get when you're buying most other pop culture collectible things, even comic books. So,
Yeah, no, it's true. But we sort of had we've had various periods, so to speak, where we've been busier than other times, and there are some lulls and whatnot, but a lot of it was fairly condensed for us in the early years, and then a little more so in more recent years. But every time we think, oh, there was a period there where we weren't doing anything, we realized, oh, no, we did actually buy some stuff while we were at it. But it wasn't really until, I think, the mid to late 80s, or maybe slightly later, we got really involved in picking up auction catalogs and starting to see things rolling there. And in the early days, it was just whatever we could buy at the shows. And we didn't really stray that far afield. We were pretty much limited to what we could get here and going down to Ithacon for Bill Turner's old show there. So we were limited in terms of the amount of stuff that we were finding available.
Yeah.
But speaking of that, we did make a couple of forays to the original Frazetta Museum, and also made some subsequent visits with Al Williamson at his various studios, and ended up doing combo visits of going down to one, staying over a few days, coming back to the other, and then coming home. So.
Yeah, the Frazetta Museum was one thing. Our local comic shop had the museum poster up on the wall, and we looked at it, the Frank Frazetta Museum. Oh my! And we looked at that down the bottom, and it said East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, and they're quite pre-internet. So we get out the Rand McNally Road Atlas, find Pennsylvania and start scouring it for, and we're thinking, well, I mean, if it's not in New York City, then I mean, East Stroudsburg's got to be a big place, and it wasn't.
We have no issues with the Frazetta Museum per se, but if they could have put a phone number on that poster, it would have been really that's in the old days of having to call up directory assistants and get referred to it, so you could find a number to call and that kind of thing. But we did manage to do that, and we made a number of pilgrimages to the original museum. We never made it to the second one, but we did go to the first one, and we were fortunate enough to end up meeting Frank a few times and getting a personal tour of some stuff and going back to the house. We chatted with Ellie. We made actually a family holiday of the very first visit. Our dad was a big fan as well. Our mom sat outside the museum with Ellie talking about, I think, skin creams and cooking.
And knitting or something. Yeah,
something like that. Yeah. So, well, we looked at the art.
Yeah.
But the original museum there was a little bit of a riser to put your foot on, and then you could get your face right up against the original pieces. And typically it wasn't that busy. They had a good-sized room. Ellie sat up at the desk in the front there, and you could really get up and see all the originals, and they had all the majors in there. It was great.
And it was really exciting that the one after hours when we went back with Frank, and he walked us around, and we just talked about the pieces. And
it seemed to sort of tickle Ellie that we had come from another country, even though other people had probably driven further than we had within the U.S. to get there. It struck her as kind of interesting that we come all the way from Canada, which was sort of an 8.5, 9-hour drive to the original museum there. But that got us a little extra cachet, I think, of it. One thing I want to say, though, for the Frazettas and with Al as well, and his wife Corey, and with Boris and Julie when we met them later, very gracious with their time with young collectors. They didn't need to be, but they were, and that really added to the experience in terms of what it was like to meet your icons.
They were all lovely people.
Yeah, it's been great. So
I'm definitely jealous. I grew up in Northeast Ohio, so I was probably only 4 to 5 hours away, and I never made the trip, even to the later museum, which is not which is wrong. I mean, I feel like the next time I go to IX or something, I should put a couple of days in there and do that.
We had plans to make it to the second one and just left it too late. And then by the time we had actually decided we were going to go, Ellie died, and then it ended up being closed and it was too late. So one of those nasty reminders to actually get out there and do it rather than think you're going to do it later.
Yeah.
But either the original visit or one of the second visits we made was when they started doing the remarked drawings on the museum poster without the green background. So this was the first one we got, which is number 28 in the series. And we commissioned that one. We went down a few months later to pick it up, and then we commissioned a second one, which is number 45, which we'll see as well. I've never seen an earlier one than this, and there's a bit tighter detail in this one than any of the other ones we've seen subsequently.
And unfortunately, too, when Frank was having his thyroid problem, and they hadn't really diagnosed it yet, he was definitely having issues. And the work we saw a few of the pieces waiting to be picked up that were closer to, say, in the early 100s, and it was very unfortunate. They were looked very weak, and didn't really even look much like Frank. But at the time, I mean, it was, you can get a cat and a girl for $1,000, or cat or girl for 600, and so it was. You
made the right choice.
Yeah, I think we.
This is the second one, number 45. Now, one of the other oddities is that there is some duplicate numbering, which has cropped up over the last little while. One of the visits that we made, Ellie asked us what numbers we had, because she said she had misplaced her list and they had gotten a little disorganized. I think what with Frank's illness and other issues, they just accidentally ended up duplicating some numbers, because it has turned out, it's not that any of them are forgeries or anything like that. It's just that it got a little mixed up somewhere. So that one, number 45 there, another number 45 cropped up recently at Heritage. So we did contact them and went over it with Todd Hignite, and he explained what had been going on. But if you can, go back to the previous one there, the number 28 there, now that we've seen that one. Yeah, you can see there's a bit tighter detail there in terms of it's very similar overall. The only other thing I think was unfortunate is that this is the poster minus a solid green background that was all around it. So it was a very limited space for him to work in. It's too bad maybe that they couldn't have done a separate poster for it that gave him a bigger area or something maybe more square to actually work in.
Yeah, and Frank also said to us that he wasn't that happy with the paper as far as drawing on it went either.
It's very slick. Yeah, it's not like a standard paper where you got a bit of tooth to it. But we at the time, we thought we're incredibly fortunate to be able to get an original piece of Frank Frazetta art. There was no way we could afford anything else at that time, certainly not now. So it was a great way to get something.
Did he? How did he publicize the opportunity to get the $1,000 girl and the cat, or $600?
I think it was just at the museum.
Yeah, it was. I think it was only for museum guests or anybody who spread word of mouth, because that's 85, 86, around that time they got started. Pre-internet, so I don't think they were broadcasting that information. It was going to be 300 anyway, so I figured they figured that it would take care of itself in a short span of time. So yeah, so that was those two.
Yeah,
I can see what you mean. It's a bit more detail, certainly, but they're both beautiful.
Yeah, he definitely had a magic touch. There's no doubt about that. It really was. Now, the first time we met Al Williamson there at one of the shows in Ithacon there, we got on well with him during the day, and we got a fairly loose sketch from him. And afterwards, when we met up with him after the show, he said he didn't really feel like we'd gotten our money's worth. That actually sort of set in motion getting visited or being invited to visit and whatnot, and ending up with these two pieces. But dinner was a disaster.
Oh, at the show, yeah.
The show, the restaurant we went to, they just weren't prepared for a big crowd. We ended up sitting right across from Al and Corey and their very young son, Victor, at the time. The end result of it, from our point of view, was that in having a great chat, we got invited back to the studio to see him at a later date, which we did. So on our first visit there, we stayed overnight in the studio, and he gifted us these pair of strips at the end of it.
So it was wonderful. But that dinner, we were fortunate enough that the show organizer invited us. We were from out of town, as it were, and not only did we sort of sit with Al, but the entire studio was there. We had Wrightson, Jones, Smith, and Kaluta, and that was. We're looking up and down the table, going, "Oh my!"
That's surreal, right? But I mean, I'm sure that all those guys admired Williamson. I mean, just he was legendary at that point. I mean, and this is a fantastic pair of strips. I mean, this is the way strips should be done. I mean, they're fantastic.
The panel on the top left corner there is him and Archie Goodwin as models for the piece. I think it ended up on the cover, one of the IDW reprints. But when you see them in person, there's just so much subtlety to a lot of the inks and the detail that you don't really get, unfortunately, seeing it reproduced or even looking at it online. These were two of the very early pieces we had framed, and we didn't know anything about it at the time. They did end up tanning a little bit from modest exposure even to the light. So we did learn a lesson out of that. And now anything that we're going to put up is covered with museum glass or UV protected glass. You can see a little of tanning around the edges there in terms of the yellowing of the paper. But yeah, there's no way to know those things sometimes, unfortunately, until you've made a mistake.
Yeah, I mean that's it is unfortunate, but it looks like you caught it early enough where it's
it's not terrible.
Yeah, it doesn't really detract from the pieces at all, and I mean, it's a woman I work with for doing some restoration, and she's like, it shows its age. It's not. Sometimes these things aren't worth even correcting because they're 40, 50-year-old pieces. So this is it comes with the territory.
The standard comic art paper too isn't quite as robust as we might like it to be over time. Even pages that have been cared for, some of them have dulled with age, some of them are still great, but a lot of you look at a lot of the original EC pages, how tanned those pages are and how much staining there is, it just can't really avoid it. But no, that was quite an experience. We did make a number of visits to Al's various studios over the next few years, but there was nothing quite like that first round there and going in and seeing all this stuff. It was the perfect studio in terms of all this great art on the walls and Al there working away. Brett Brevins was, sharing studio space with him. It was Al's studio at the time, but never envied anybody as much as I did him at the time. But this was a Brett piece that Al inked for a High Adventure comic that we picked up, either from Brett or from Al. I think
you got it from Brett.
I might have got it directly from him. But now I should mention, too, there are a few pieces in here that we don't have anymore, including one of the burn pages. This is one that we no longer have, but we kind of wanted to show more of a retrospective of some of the stuff we've done. But yeah, beautiful piece, beautifully inked, just great stuff. The comic is kind of a nothing throwaway sort of comic, but just this gorgeous art. It's great stuff.
Yeah, the composition's amazing, and the just the different techniques in the inking down here are it's beautiful. I love this piece.
At that stage, Al was doing a bit more brushwork still from the earlier days. In the latter part of his inking at Marvel, it was primarily pen, but he was still doing a bit of brushwork there. Great stuff.
Wow.
And again, relatively affordable at the time. It's changed a lot now versus picking up pieces like that, but they just weren't that, they weren't all that expensive at the time.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, that's wow. Again, you guys have done the things that many collectors today dream of doing. Just the opportunity to go once to Williams Studio would have been enough, or once to the Frazetta Museum, the first one, and you got to do repeat visits and have them get to know you a little bit, which is definitely part of the fun. And I think you said your father was interested in Frazetta work too. Did that mean that did he collect art, or was he a fan of the Clint Eastwood movie posters? Or
no, I think he more just appreciated the work itself, the skill. And I think he enjoyed the sort of the barbarian theme and that sort of thing. So we had the paperbacks, the Conan paperbacks with the Frazetta covers, and then that was pretty much, I guess, the
involvement. We didn't inherit anything, unfortunately. No. There was no stockpile of art ahead of time for that, which was a shame.
Right. But I think again, art's something you can share with the whole family. I don't think I ever got the opportunity to really talk with my father about what the hobby that I come to really appreciate. But I think that's wonderful that you're able to do that.
It made it a lot easier, as opposed to your parents hate everything that you're doing, and then
you're not bringing that home, are you?
Yeah. Now we've had pockets, so to speak, or segments of collecting as we think of it. Everything actually overlaps to a certain degree, but we've been busier in certain aspects at times than others. In the early stages, it was primarily comics. We got into comic art. We also got heavily into pulp collecting with original magazines. We also had a very brief 20, 30 years period of collecting vintage golden age era comic or illustration art. Sorry.
Yeah. Turn of last century kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And again, we did have a few color pieces, but for the most part, it was all pen and ink work, which kind of sticks with that comic art theme. But we had
where would you be picking artwork like that at?
Illustration House in New York.
Illustration House, okay.
The premier spot. Yeah.
I don't know if they're still going, but at that time they were kind of almost the name. This is, I think, a little bit prior to Heritage getting involved in that, and before Heritage, Mastronet was in there for a while. But Illustration House was really it as far as getting that going. we did start getting their catalogs in the mail, you know, the regular mail. This is still pre-internet. And eventually we started making trips down there to their gallery to look at stuff. And it was just, it's astounding to see that work in person. A lot of the originals are quite big, like James Montgomery Flagg worked on these 20 by 30 inch drawings with these giant strokes of pen, and you just think, wow, why would you work that?
And then it got shrunk down into a women's magazine and about 2 by 3 inches, you know, but
when the printing wasn't really that good, so who knows?
But along with a lot of the pulp cover artists too, they knew what their final product was going to be, and so they could work large and loose and quickly, and know that when it was shrunk down, it would tighten up and it would look good.
One of the other fortunate aspects of being involved in the time is there are a couple of really great shows in those early days that have never been repeated, and I doubt ever will be. There was a gorgeous pen and ink exhibit at the Brandywine Museum, I guess late 80s, early 90s, whenever that was. Can't remember exactly, but they had all kinds of Joseph Clement Cole art and Flagg and all these other great artists in a beautiful setting, hardly anybody in there. It was a wonderful way to see those originals in the early stages for us, just to see how good that art really was. That was great stuff. There was also a wonderful exhibit at the Norman Rockwell Museum, I think in 99 or 2000, around there, of J.C. Landecker art. And they had this tremendous gathering of Arrow shirt collar ads and Kuppenheimer and all kinds of great stuff. I don't think we'll ever see anything like those again.
And that was, you know, I mean, that was amazing to see. Neil and I were just awestruck with all the stuff in both instances. And in both instances, we almost sort of, like we were almost at the car and we hadn't even gone to see the Rockwells at the Rockwell Museum. We thought, maybe we should. Now we're here. And the same thing with the Brandywine. It was Wyeth's studio. And so we went, we should probably wander through and have a look at the Wyeths while we're here.
At the Rockwell Museum, we literally just strode right past all of the Rockwells to get to the Landecker at the back of the hall there, and then realized, we should actually look at those. But not that we didn't enjoy it or it wasn't wonderfully displayed. It was just you were there for a very different purpose. But,
exactly.
So we did get into our phase there. Some of the pieces, unfortunately, we don't have scans of anymore and don't have good quality images, but we did include a few in here that we have.
And we also sort of got out of that almost wholesale and to another fellow comic art fan who came up and picked up a whole bunch of pieces.
That was a Joseph Clement Cole piece that we're pretty sure it's unpublished. Everything of Cole's is more or less documented. The reason I think it might have been unpublished is when we came to use it as a frontispiece for a book we were putting out of other pieces of Cole's from King of the Khyber Rifles, it's very difficult to reproduce and almost impossible as line art. Some of the detail is so fine and it's so delicate, you just couldn't do it, especially if you were going to shrink it down. Even scanning it at like 1000 DPI, I couldn't hold some of the work that was in there. So that may be, again, that's strictly speculative, but that may be why it was never used.
The other thing too is we're not sure, because we couldn't find it located anywhere what it was from. It almost has like a war bonds look to it to us. So we weren't sure, but a gorgeous piece. You could really just stick your nose in that and stay there for a long time.
That was a hard one to let go of. I have to admit that was a tough one to make that decision finally. But we did end up letting go of it in a number of other pieces.
What's the size of this piece?
It's probably around 12, 18, maybe a little smaller. It's not a very big piece.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just happy to hear it. That's nice. I was thinking it might have been more like 11 by 13 , something like that.
It probably is.
Probably. Sorry,
8 by 10, maybe ish.
Okay. But it's
a lot of them are small.
Beautiful. Wow.
Yeah, he was just an absolute genius. The thing I find fascinating with Cole's art is when you look at Flagg, you can see the strokes and the cross hatching, and it's very obvious what he did. With a lot of Cole's work, it's almost like anarchy with a pen. You can't really tell how he did it. You can see the end result, but you can't quite figure out how he got there.
Yeah. And even Frank Frazetta, when we were down there, said Cole's a god.
Yeah.
It's
great stuff.
Wow. But I'm with you on the idea that some of these, we can't really get exhibitions like these too often anymore. I mean, the work is scattered in so many different collections, probably at other museums as well, and trying to coordinate something like that, and even finding the interest anymore. Unfortunately,
I wonder if there will be enough people to make it commercially viable, possibly not on its own, in conjunction with something else, maybe. But the This is an artist that we don't hear a lot about, Orson Lowell. I personally have always thought he was sort of a split between James Montgomery Flagg and Charles Dana Gibson in style. Not quite as stiff as Gibson, not quite as flamboyant as Flagg, but just beautifully drawn. And a lot of it is what's not there, is the parts that are left out, the things that are hinted at. It's just, it's so beautifully done.
And this one was actually for an interior illustration in a pulp magazine.
Yes. Yeah, from everybody's. So it crossed two platforms for us. It was both great vintage illustration art and crossed into the pulp. So it was a win-win. But when you think of guys turning these illustrations out for not a whole lot of money and maybe doing 2 or 3 of them a week and whatnot, it's an incredible era that I certainly don't think we're going to see again either.
No. No Booth.
That was our Franklin Booth, and it's funny too because typically with the collection that we had, there's usually sort of an attractive female figure in her, or a superhero or something like that. And so when we have friends look at this and going, okay, it's sheep and a shepherd. Like, why do you have this piece? And we go, but look at that. Look at the clouds. And look at the awesome grass. Work there. My goodness. It's just fabulous.
These pieces, too, when we were picking them up, but mostly from Illustration House, you kind of always assumed that there were going to be more, but it turned out that there weren't for a lot of them. There were only a few turned up, and there's scarcity of it makes it very difficult to come by a lot of them. And over time, we were surprised at how little opportunity there was to actually pick up anything new.
But it is also that whole illustration art phase. You could really see where a lot of guys that came afterwards got their inspiration. I mean, Wrightson, you just have to look at the clouds, the trees, and things like that to see how he got inspired, especially in his Frankenstein plates and whatever. And even today, David Finch, we were talking to him, and because some of his backgrounds are starting to get into that zone, we're going, that's Booth.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, you mentioned Wrightson and the Frankenstein plates too. I mean, can we ever think that a modern day comic book illustrator would ever think to approach a theme like that to the level that they did if they didn't have this influence happening, around them or near them in their presence? I mean, this work had to have inspired, Bernie to tackle Frankenstein in a way that, he's basically, giving kudos to the artists who came before him.
Yeah.
I just can't picture anyone doing, something like that again.
No.
Outside of, look at Jusko getting, paid to work on the ERB works, for instance, but not too many artists, I think, would tackle topics like these in a similar way.
Fortunately, there have been a lot of really good books out in the last 10, 20 years on some of the classic illustrators. I mean, Flesk is putting out some great stuff, and there are various other publishers. If you're interested, you can still get a good book on a fairly good comprehensive book on a lot of that classic art.
Yeah.
An Illustration magazine was a wonderful source for that stuff too.
So to Dan Smith we had, and really like that.
Yeah, it's
just the whole, just sort of sense of motion, and it's sort of a sense of humor and chaos, even though it's a big snake. And
we'd never heard of them until Al Williamson mentioned it to us. He had just bought 3 pieces when we were down at one of our visits there, and we're showing to him. It's like this great stuff. We thought, we've never heard of this guy, but he is relatively obscure. People are starting to catch on to him now, but how many originals are still floating around, I have no idea.
Right.
The other thing that's interesting with a lot of that art, especially for magazine purposes, is that there are gaps in it. A lot of them are vignette style because that's where the type is going to creep in. And some of them have got square blocks left out or actual areas chipped out of it, which is where type is going to go. So the missing piece in the bottom corner there isn't an accident. It's left there for a specific purpose.
That's a lovely.
That one we no longer have. That also went to our calf purchaser there.
Yeah.
Great piece.
Well, that's good. One of the things that I was always happy to see early on with Comic Art Fans was the number of illustration art collectors that were using the site.
Yeah.
Because, that was always kind of my passion as well. I mean, but maybe not as far back as the both of you, but I always was worried that having a name like Comic Art Fans was going to restrict what the use of CAF to go beyond just comic book artwork. But it worked well. I mean,
it was a terrific addition, adding the fantasy art aspect from IX there as well. That really broadened horizons. And again, a surprise. Well, not really, but sort of a surprise at how many people cross over into multiple platforms with that kind of work.
Exactly. Yeah, I know Patrick's been a good friend for a long time, and I really I wish I got to spend more time with him and talk about the things that we love, because I've just had a very rewarding, a much more well-rounded, I think, art view of the arts because of my friendship with Patrick Wilshire.
No, Pat and Jeannie have been great in doing what they did, and the early days of that show.
Nothing quite like it.
Just awesome. Yeah.
But so we grouped those together, not that it came and went in that concise a fashion. We were doing that for a number of years, but we sort of thought we would group those together. And then sort of in the mid to late 80s, we kind of got back a little more heavily into comic art again and started picking up things at auctions as opposed to relying on strictly what we could see on somebody's table. So I think that's the next stuff up, is the next phase, so to speak.
It's either that or it's the pulps.
I think it's, no, I think, Now, this is a piece we no longer have, and I apologize to the calf collector who has it. We stole the image out of his gallery because I don't have a good scan of it. We got that directly from Rick Leonardi at one of the shows, I think, at one of the Ithaca shows in the late 80s there. Again, one of those pieces we were reluctant to let go of. It's a great piece. I don't know anything about the characters, don't really care.
Just love the work.
Just beautiful work, and it was just such a striking image.
I've always loved Leonardi's work, and when Austin was inking him, I mean, they were... it was magical. I mean, I would assume you guys probably had the same thing. If Austin was working on the book, you were interested, right?
Yeah,
pretty much. Yeah. He, I mean, I think the Claremont Byrne Austin X-Men combination. I mean, if each one of them brought 10 out of 10 to the table, you ended up with about a 45 value at the end of it. They just fed off each other, I think, in a way that is magical. It happens every now and then, but not always. Pieces
like this are interesting too, because it's in that sort of transition phase where prior to everything being done digitally, most of it was still being glued onto the art. But in some cases it wasn't. They would shoot it separately and strip it together. So with a piece like this, you've got all this gorgeous work there that doesn't have the stats stuck on it. So you get the whole image as opposed to parts of it covered up or bits and pieces of it that have fallen off. But we were very happy to get that one, and somewhat sorry to see it go. But eventually things have to find their way out there,
because it usually goes out the door to fund something else.
Yes.
We only have so much wall space, so
it's the ultimate recycling program. You get a piece in, you change it up for something else. It just happens to be money in between sometime. This again is two separate pieces, two Mike Kaluta sketches that we got from him in the late 80s at one of the shows we were at. Big fans of the Shadow, loved the short run that he had on it. We were collecting the pulps heavily at the time, really enjoying reading those. So it was a no-brainer as to what to ask him for. It was a Shadow and Margot Lane.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen too many Margot Lane sketches from him. You see a lot of Shadow sketches, but not too many Margot Lane ones.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. Kaluta's somebody I've never owned anything by. And every time I see his work, I'm like, I've got to correct that at some point.
Yeah. And every time you see it, it's gone up in price too, which is
I know. It's like I got to stop saying it and just do it.
Yeah.
Oh boy, this is a beautiful piece.
Yeah. That was that's probably a little bittersweet. It's probably going to be the only really good Wrightson piece we'll ever have. It's just the combo of the pen and brush work, that zone from '73. It ended up being the cover of a
comic buyer's
guide, but otherwise, I mean, we probably wouldn't really be able to afford a solid Swamp Thing page that has that kind of work on it.
Kind of got it all for us, but and that actually is the piece that doesn't have the most views in our CAF gallery, but it's the one we've had by far the most inquiries. Do we want to let go of it? That one gets a lot of attention as far as that goes.
So far, no.
No.
No. Yeah, like you just said, you can't replace it.
No, that's a problem.
And some pieces, like we've never bought anything we didn't like, obviously, but some pieces, no matter how long you've been staring at it, every time you look at it, it's like seeing it for the first time in ways. You still get that same charge out of looking at it that you did when you initially had it. And this is definitely one of those.
Yeah.
You just can't walk by that piece without having to stare at it and think, man, what great work that is.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is reminiscent of the grass, right? With
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
the booth,
which
just
is
the same style, yeah, as the booth piece. It's just wow, I love this.
it's relatively small as well. It's about 9 by 12. It's
Yeah.
in around that zone.
You know, it's something like that. I love that. It's more intimate,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's so much packed into this. It's such an emotional piece. And I almost want it to be small. You have to get up and you have to look at it.
Yeah.
You can't just step back
No.
and just
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Also,
You
you
really
recognize it. If it was on a page of comic art, well, that will be a fairly good sized panel.
Yeah.
And that too is how we kind of relate to some of it. Is
Yeah.
that, well, yeah, if that was on a standard page, that would be a good piece.
And if you think some of the Swamp Thing covers, then there's quite a bit of space at the top for the logo. So like it's almost getting to the size of the actual art that is there on the cover.
Well, everybody wants early rights in, so
Yeah, and there's so little of it. Like,
no,
you guys who are not volume producers.
not at all. Let's see, what was the next piece, or do we? I think we're moving into a different genre. If I'm not mistaken.
Maybe into the pulps.
Yes, yeah. Then we're into pulp art. Yes, that's right. So our brief middle period here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an Al McWilliams interior pulp illustration, we think probably from Wings. We never did manage to identify it. But this beautiful work, a lot of it is probably more tonal than it should be for making line shots for pulps. A lot of the interior illustrations did not reproduce that well on the crappy paper with poor technique. When you see the art, it's like night and day to realize how much effort some of those guys put in and how good they were.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, I'd love to see how it reproduced because I'm sure it lost a lot of detailing. I mean, look at the line work and the art.
The brush on there. Yeah.
And the pulp paper was awful for that sort of thing too.
Yeah. But these again are pieces that they're not hideously expensive by any means. Even now, they're not that pricey. You can get some really good art still that maybe isn't from something particularly significant or maybe not a big name, but there is still some really good work out there that you can pick up at a reasonable price. These were Ralph Kramer illustrations from Unknown. The comical part was when they came up at auction, it said Unknown, but not Unknown the magazine, Unknown as in they didn't know what they were, but we knew what they were. I think there were 5 or 6. We ended up picking those up. Same thing though, this beautiful dry brush work on there that reproduces terribly in the pulps, but it's such great work in terms of the actual art.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Bearing in mind that at the time, I think they were paying something like $7 or $8 for the original illustrations and $15 for a double page spread. It didn't pay well at all. You could make a living at it if you could turn it out in enough quantity, but as far as an actual living goes, it was tough to make a go of it.
Yeah, I was actually speaking. I did an interview with a gentleman who's worked on a lot of licensing work over the years, and yeah, he always had 5 different jobs going on at a time to basically make a living. And it's somebody who I didn't know, and it's somebody who's has created great work, but nobody knows him, right? Because he's he's one of those behind the scene kind of guys who. There's a lot of unsung people like that guy.
And even in talking to some people who were in it in the early days saying, well, yeah, but I had to spend $2 for a model and that cut into your profit picture substantially. Do it if you could avoid it. Now you think about hiring somebody for a couple of hours for $2. That's not going to fly.
No, not at all.
Now, this is one of the few pieces that we are not entirely in conjunction on here. He likes it better than I do.
Yeah.
So,
No, we were definitely heavy into pulps, both collecting them, also selling them. We did quite a few facsimile reprints of pulp magazines, and this was one of the. There's a little patch of Weird Tales where, unlike most of the Canadian editions, which were reprints and came out later, there were actually a few Canadian Weird Tales in the mid-late 40s, and they're sort of quite sought after. There were only a couple of cover artists on them. I think it was only about 14 pulps in total there. But one local Toronto artist, Gordon Rayner, did some of them, and we acquired this piece from his daughter. She was pretty sure it was the only one they had left. They were stored in the garage, and there was a big flood, and everything kind of went. out the door there. So so we were happy to get that. We got it professionally cleaned, and yeah, and as Neil says, it's I'm more partial to it than he is,
which is okay.
But so does this one not swap when you do?
Actually, it could, but it doesn't. Yeah, that's one of the few pieces that we don't actually bother with, because I'm not excited enough to want to give up the wall space that I could have something else for it.
Yeah, and I have just a little bit more wall space than Neil does, so a few of the extra pieces are here almost permanently.
But I have a key in visitation rights, so it's
now you mentioned restoration work on this. So you've used restoration as a way to make sure that the pieces that you bought are going to be here for the next generation. I mean, that's been a consideration in your purchases as well.
We've had a few pieces cleaned and revarnished, and we ended up getting a lot of our fantasy art pieces revarnished or an additional varnish, just because we figured enough years had passed that it would be a good idea to have a little bit of additional protection on it. So yeah, we've been fairly conscious there. And anything in the way of paper that we put up on the walls now has UV protected glass.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Still in the pulp vein here. Now, this is actually sort of a little bit of a cheat. We owned this temporarily, not ever intending it to be part of our permanent collection. A friend of ours, who's a huge shadow collector and whatnot, came across it and was going to buy it, but didn't have the money for it at the time. It was one of the rare instances where we had a little bit of a surplus of cash. So we bought it for him, never intending to keep it. It was just a hold for about 6 months while he came up with the money to do it. But it's the third skull from, I think, 35. I should know this, I used to. But when you look at the bigger image, you can see that the skull in the background is actually made up of those people and the guy with his hat in his hand there. So it was quite a neat piece.
Yeah, no, it's very smart.
Yeah, it's George Rosen there from the classic shadow period. Those are the originals are in around the 22 by 28 zone inches wise. They're a fair size. So that was a lot of fun to own that temporarily, knowing that we were never going to, not something we would necessarily wade into ourselves. But we love the art, but just they were so hard to come by and they were so expensive at that time. We just weren't seriously considering.
Yeah,
sure.
We had a lovely occasion to visit with the family of H.J. Ward, one of our favorite pulp artists, cover artists for the spicy magazines in particular. And we wanted to do a little article on him in a publication we had. And so so we found the family, and we had a beautiful visit down there. And they weren't really looking to sell too many of the pieces, but in going through and taking a number of photographs for our article, then this one really kind of leapt out for us, and so they were actually gracious enough to sell it to us, and even to package it up and let us take it away and pay them afterwards, because we had no thought whatsoever to make a purchase while we were down there.
Just to clarify, we don't have a thing about whipping women or abusing people or anything.
I was not going to ask, but this is the era, right, where
that one's 1940.
Right, and so no, I don't think anything of it. I love illustration art, and
Spicy Detective, August of 1940 to be exact. But,
and the woman was his wife. He used his wife as a model extensively. So.
Who he didn't whip either. That was roles,
but she could make a perfect expression of a woman who might be in peril. So that's
I think he must have gotten used to it by the time his career was rolling there. But, so that was a fun piece to acquire. That one we no longer have either. We don't have that one anymore, unfortunately. And an Earl Gertie pulp cover as well from Bedtime Stories, I think it was in '38. One of those pieces that turned up at a heritage auction. We kind of eyed it, thought we'd like it, put a cheapish bid in, and accidentally won it.
Yeah,
that was a nice piece. Don't have that one anymore either. But that's again part of one of the phases that we've gone through over a couple of decades.
We should have kept a list of what we bought with the money for everything we let go of, but
exactly this piece
to say whatever revenue came in generated something else for the wall.
Now this was actually a birthday gift I commissioned from Al Williamson for Leigh in '91 there, and Al was gracious enough to be willing to do it. This was his take on Flash Gordon at the time, just ahead of that two-part series that Marvel put out, that miniseries. and he repurposed this piece for either one of the covers or the promotional poster. I can't remember which, with a black background and some other details. It is not the same piece. This was a preliminary type approach, and then he reused it later on. But just beautiful stuff. It looks a bit Han Solo-ish, but that's okay.
Yeah, no, it doesn't hurt the piece at all.
No,
have that kind of a vibe. No, it's beautiful. Wow. Yeah, you know, I'm holding back saying congratulations because it's like one wonderful you know, piece for the wall after another here that we were looking at today.
Bear in mind, we're seeing a condensed version of 40 odd years worth, though. It's not like this all happened overnight.
Right. No. I get it. It started in the late 70s. My goodness. I mean, you know, you're coming in. It's over 45 years each.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm feeling it.
Well, in September, our Burn Austin will be 45 years in our possession. So that was kind of exciting.
Yeah, that was a fun piece to get.
Now, we're gonna talk about commissions, I believe.
Yeah. This one we didn't commission ourselves. It was one we picked up in the aftermarket, but it's not per se huge Ed Benes fans. I mean, I like his work well enough, but it was just such a great piece, and we thought, I just can't resist it. So, so we picked that one up.
Yeah, commissions are one of those things we have definitely commissioned pieces, and for some pieces that we own, we didn't actually commission it, although it was either commission or a con sketch. But nothing really beats being able to see it before you buy it. However, there are times when you just want what you want from the artist, and maybe it isn't their norm, and so you have no other real alternative but to to ask them for it and cross your fingers and hope it works well.
I think one of the difficulties of it is that not necessarily that they don't put effort in or you don't get a good piece. Sometimes the magic just isn't there for you. It isn't a piece that sings. You get a good result, but it just doesn't call to you, which can be really disappointing as far as commissions are concerned. Whereas if you're looking at it, you say, it's got everything I want, or I can forgive that, and I like this well enough to take it.
Yeah, and Neil and I are very particular when it comes to to what we like, and at least we know what we like, and it's not vague. But it does mean that you sort of sometimes you feel like you're over art directing your poor artist there to get it just the way you want. But if it's not there, people can look at it and go, it's a beautiful piece, and you go, but it's not really what we wanted.
There are a couple of artists in our acquaintance who no longer take art direction, I think strictly because of dealing with us. That we had such a definite idea of how we wanted it to go that they aren't willing to do it anymore.
Right. I get that. When I started collecting, I was more of a commission collector, and I definitely over-directed a few people who just turned me down. And they were ready to take the $500, and then I tell them what they want, and they're like, I don't feel like drawing it.
I think there is a fine line between some people who know what they want and don't know what they want, kind of. But the tough part is if it's not going to work for you as the owner, then there's no point in commissioning it. But sometimes people aren't necessarily able to convey what they want accurately either. So it's tough for the artist to know exactly what it is that's going to satisfy them. And if they figure in the end you're not going to want it, then there's no point in them doing it. But this was a piece that we didn't actually commission ourselves. We did pick it up in the aftermarket. David Finch pencils with Danny Mickey inks, subsequently done by the guy who had it. I would personally prefer the guy had left it in pencil, not because the inking isn't wonderfully done, but it's just such a classic era and a great piece from Finch that I would rather have seen the pencils, and I would have left it that way myself. But
we're normally not fans of sort of the blue line approach. However, there are times when I think, if you had that as a pencil piece, it would have been, and wanted Mickey to ink it, which I can certainly understand. It would be one of those things that I would have been tempted to have had it blue line, so that you could have had your cake and eat it too.
Yeah,
right.
And especially for an unpublished piece where it's not a printed comic page, where you're not getting into the distinction where if the pencils aren't the actual part that's reproduced, then they have less value than the finished version, which is the actual printed version. When you're talking commissions, it doesn't really matter. So you could go both ways and do that.
True.
But otherwise, still a great piece that we were very happy to get.
We did mention that we're big David Finch fans, did we not?
Become readily apparent in the final.
As am I. I mean, you know, he's. But here you go. You've got an all pencil piece, and so now you can almost imagine what that piece looked like before Danny.
We were actually
Danny's a great inker over.
Oh yeah. We were actually on our way to visit David when this turned up. I think it was on Anthony's site. And we were like literally getting our shoes on to leave when we checked the computer one last time, and there it is. So we thought, oh, geez, we got to have that. So it delayed us getting on the road slightly, but
it was well worth the delay.
Yeah, beautiful stuff. And there is a temptation with a piece like that to do or to ask David for a blue line inked version of it, but I would never touch the pencils on that one. It's so good in pencil. There's no way I would do anything with that.
Philip Tan.
Yes.
It was just the looseness and the energy in his pencil commissions there was amazing. We didn't commission this. We picked it up after the fact, but just, and again, don't even know who the character is, but she's gorgeous, and it's such beautiful work. Just the energy and the mood there was really captivating. And when you can get something like that, even in sort of today's
market,
today's market for a couple of $100, then it's really nice to be able to have something that doesn't break the bank all the time.
We know who the character is now, so anybody who's frustratedly typing the name doesn't need to worry about that. The other
I'm not a DC guy, so I know who the character is, but I don't know anything about them. But I love this. The loose quality of the feathers and the wings works so well. I mean, you'd think sometimes that you can do that and it just kind of falls apart, but it doesn't. It just holds it up. It actually pulls it all together really well. Wow.
We've also kind of transitioned with the pages we bought from needing to own the comic to not needing to own the comic and just appreciating the art. The same with the commissions. We sort of it doesn't really matter to us whether it's a big name character or whether it's a big name artist or whatever. If we like it well enough, then okay, we'll wade in. But that's one of the things a few people have asked us. Well, what is your focus? Well, it's anything that we like well enough to buy it. That's really the only answer we can give people, because we don't have anything that's super specific in terms of what we're looking to chase down.
Sure.
Again, another very detailed pencil piece from Diego Bernard. This one we did not commission ourselves either, but just great work and a relatively inexpensive piece. And I thought, why not?
That was early on in his career too. I don't think he was doing much regular work at the time. But we we did commission a couple directly back then as well, and he did great work.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And again, it's got Spider-Man in it. I know one of your
that was good. Now, in terms of commissions, this is one of those oddities where, as beautiful as the piece is, we didn't actually end up getting exactly what we want. Now, one thing, I don't know if you know how it's pronounced. Is it Anacleto? Anacleto? Do you know?
I've always said Anacleto, but
we've gone with Anacleto. My apologies to everybody if it's wrong, and if anybody knows, they could let us know that. But we did commission this piece.
We'll just call him Jay.
Jay, this is Jay. We did commission this one, and we got what we asked for, except the view of her is wrong. We asked for a front or three-quarter front view, and we got a three-quarter back view. I think it was strictly an accidental thing in the translation of it through his rep and whatnot. It wasn't enough that we would complain and say, no, we don't want it, and we didn't see a preliminary sketch where we would have corrected it. But it was one of those reminders that commissions don't always end up exactly as you anticipate. But the work he put in and everything is just absolutely stunning.
Yeah. We're big fans of his work too. Have quite a few commissions and a couple of published Deja Thoris covers.
No, Jay's obviously a fantastic artist, and he's rep by Three Wishes, right? So they're throwing very, very accessible for people.
Yeah. And I also find too that while almost every artist you can think of that has sort of a career that spans many years, they'll go through stylistic changes. You can see them sort of maybe finding their way at the beginning, getting into a groove, then maybe as they get a little more established, maybe sometimes they'll back off a little bit in the detail and what have you. But Jay's stuff just seems to be absolutely in the zone and always very uniform, very even. I think if you saw a brand new piece from him tomorrow, it would look like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Right.
The thing that amazes me a lot with his work too is that even though a lot of it is harder pencil that doesn't smudge as easily, everything is so precise. There are no structure lines, loose lines underneath anything. It looks as though there's just one line there and nothing in the way of development or whatever. I don't know how he does it.
It's amazing.
Yeah, they're just
technical skill is
astounding. Incredible stuff.
Well, I agree. I've always loved this stuff, and there's not a lot of his inked work out there either, but it's just as beautiful. Surprisingly so, because I think of him strictly as a penciler.
Yes. Yeah. I actually don't need it. I know a lot of people have trouble with pencil pages where they feel that it just isn't finished. We had a little bit of that mentality in the early days as far as comic art was concerned, but now I don't really feel I need to make that distinction. A gorgeous pencil piece is just as valid as a gorgeous inked page.
Agreed.
The gorgeous part is the key.
Yeah.
Speaking of pencil.
So we were fortunate to pick up a couple of Mark Schultz pieces, this pencil piece and an inked piece. That was another artist. It was a hole in our collection. We didn't think we were ever going to fill. Again, being very fussy about the kind of the period of Mark's work, the style, the dry brush, and content too. So we kind of had to. We went back and forth. There were a few pieces that we saw that came up for sale, and they just weren't quite right, and that sort of thing. And this piece and the piece, the inked piece that comes later, we were super pleased, and they're more recent pieces, but they hark to us of a slightly earlier style, and that was it was a real bonus to get these.
With Schultz in particular, we were originally 100% focused on an ink piece. We had to have the right inked piece, and I liked his pencil work, but I just couldn't consider owning one. We just didn't think they were finished. Come to realize that what they're calling pencil preliminaries for a lot of his stuff, it's not really a preliminary. It's a drawing unto itself that he has then redone as an inked piece, maybe with some changes. The preliminaries, which do exist, are a little looser and whatnot, but these pencil pieces he's doing are definitely finished pieces on their own. Yeah,
without question. No, I'd be happy with any Schultz, but like you, I don't know. I've never found the right piece, and
it's hard. It's harder than you think. Yeah,
you're looking in the aftermarket and what other collectors have, because there's not a there's a few pieces out there with dealers, but not too often. Right?
No.
People who really collect Schultz work love it, and have a lot of it typically.
There's a shortage of people willing to let go of the good ones.
Yeah,
it is a lot more difficult to come across a piece that you're really going to be happy with.
We'd call them selfish, but we're probably guilty of the same.
Yeah. So. But this one and the other one coming up, we got directly from Mark through John Plesk's website when they were posting some.
Oh, sorry. This is I switched over to course there. I wasn't sure if we were at the end of that segment yet, but we're going to talk about. What did I? Well, I think
that was a nice teaser, though, Bill. That was well done. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. Okay, there we go. Okay. Boris is we all know that Boris is a staple at the IX shows. Fortunately, we don't get to see him at any other venue. Unfortunately, I know he's just a little over 80 right now, but
that's actually why we went to the very first Deluxe Con. Yeah. We had heard from fellow collectors that this show was on and didn't know anything about it, and said, well, Boris and Julie are going to be there, and these other people. We didn't know anything about fantasy card art or any of this gaming stuff. Didn't know anything. But Boris and Julie were going to be there, and that was it.
It's all we wanted to go. You had to go for.
Those first shows in Altoona there, Altoona didn't have a lot to offer, but that gallery that the show was in, an absolutely incredible experience. A small number of hardcore collectors only through the door, a handful of great artists, all with this beautiful work, wonderfully displayed. That was an incredible experience. Now, we didn't get that piece there. We got that one from auction. But just to go and meet them and to see art in that environment was incredible.
And I know you'd share the sentiment there, but the intimacy with the artists there was just outstanding. I mean, if you went to a con like San Diego or whatever, and Boris was going to be there, will he be a VIP guest? And you wouldn't get near him, you'd pay your $500 and get a selfie or something like that. But when we chatted and talked, and they were working at the show on some of their calendar pieces, and you could just stand there. We got invited back to the house and had some wonderful times there. They're lovely people again. When you consider the stature of people like Boris and Julie and Al and Frank, they've been so gracious to us as collectors, and it's been amazing.
Well, with Amazon's Pet there, then to us that is a quintessential Boris piece. The prime era, the classic figure, the great female figure, just wonderfully done. Everything is beautifully painted. That to us just really sung as a classic early piece. And a lot of the pieces that have turned up have been from a later era that don't quite have as much appeal to us, although we do like them. But that 70s zone there, where everybody wanted to be Frazetta, even though they weren't, there was just great magic coming from all kinds of other people as well, and it's just such an incredible period.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the 70s, the posters, that sort of thing was my era too. I mean, the Olympic stuff there is nice. It's just not quite the same as what you get here. And I think my first IX was the third one. I think that was the last year was in Altoona, if I'm not mistaken. But it was a great space, and it was just amazing to see so many amazing artists in such a small space. Really, at the end of the day, with 2 floors, with the balcony up above. But that's where I first met Donato Giancola. I'm not familiar with his work. I mean, I'd seen it, but I didn't associate it with him.
Yeah, same with us.
IX was really a game changer for me as a show, just because you didn't have a lot of collectors there, but the artists wanted to be there because it was kind of an opportunity for them to enjoy getting to meet, see each other's work. And that was something I'd never gotten at another show.
No. It was such a compact gathering of artists and collectors, and I think originally it was like 125 or 150 tickets, and that was it. And so everybody was really there because they wanted to be there.
You didn't have to ask somebody if they were into it. You just had to ask them what they were into.
Exactly.
Yeah, we haven't been to LexCon since the closures and everything, but in those later years where we were going, probably 2017, 2018, it had shifted focus somewhat into a bit more of bringing the public in and getting them accustomed to the art. And from our strictly selfish point of view, we found it detracted a little bit from our experience, not from theirs. And it was great that people were exposed to it. It wasn't quite the same, but this is.
I agree with you. After I left the museum, when it got to the Goggle Works, right, that was sort of the change. But I think that was probably part of the allure of getting to go there, because it was a public, a facility where people were taking art classes and things, and maybe the vision changed a little bit, but still the quality of the work and the artists that were there always kind of made it, so special as a collector to go to. But I completely understand.
Quite true. Well, this one is a piece that we picked up directly from Boris and Julie on our first visit down there. It's one of my favorites of Julie's work. It's a paperback cover from a series. It's called Earth Logic, and just absolutely beautiful work. That's Julie as the model from sort of early stages for her in her getting going with a career there. But it's just such beautiful stuff to see in person.
Did you get? Did you purchase directly from her?
Yes, it was right off their wall, as a matter of fact.
I was a little embarrassed to actually try and pry it out of their hands, because we assumed that it was one of her favorites as well, but they were willing to let go of it, so that was good. Yeah, no, I just love that piece. It's a great piece. Another one we got directly from them. It's the cover of the Imaginistics book that they put out a number of years ago, and I assume it's a calendar piece as well. But a combo from the two of them. You've never really been able to tell who does what, and they usually say when people guess they're wrong. So we're not going to guess because we don't want to end up being.
We have our theories.
We have our theories.
We'll keep it to ourselves.
I don't blame you.
When you consider the sheer volume of work that they've done individually as well as together, and it's just beautifully painted, incredible work. It's hard to picture having that kind of a career for that length of time.
Yeah, I agree.
Now this is a bit unique for us.
This was a step out. that was another Elixcon. It's a John Harris piece. John is an amazing man. Just wonderful to talk to. We've had great conversations with him and some of the other British artists that came over with Alison's help there. And it was when we were in, I guess, Allentown, and it was Elixcon at the museum there, and it was hanging on the wall, and it was just in one of the rooms where you came through the doorway, and there it was, and I just kept on looking at it, and it was haunting in a good way. And I said that to John, and I just found myself kept on looking at it, but it's so different from anything we had. It wasn't really. I thought
there are no people.
There's no figures in this piece.
And there's a phrase Neil and I often trot out, but you look at something and go, yeah, but what are we going to do with it?
Yeah.
And so it was a bit like that, but it was captivating. And later on, I didn't pull the trigger or anything like that at the time, but later on, talking to John, and I think it was at the Goggle Works by then, I just asked, do you still have it? And he said, yeah, I think I do. And so we ended up working out a deal, and Alison, his rep, was just absolutely fabulous, as well as John, and agreeing to make it easy to purchase. And they sent it over, including the stretcher frame, because it's quite big.
Yeah.
So that's in a special spot on its own, because you have to get the right distance away from it to really appreciate it.
Can't really put it next to a Batman page.
No.
It just doesn't really work.
No.
It's really interesting in terms of a lot of the detail is very vague and it's very suggestive, but there's such a mood and such an atmosphere to it. And for both of us, it called up a particular impression and a particular story. And it was interesting talking to John, because he said other people got different impressions of what it meant. And he sort of declined to say definitively what it meant, because it means whatever it means to you.
Yeah.
But it's a great piece to look at in person.
He did write a little bit about how he felt about it to me, and I asked him if I could publish it in the description in the gallery. So John said yes, and so when the images when you look at it in the gallery, it's got John's thoughts on it there too. So,
but definitely an outlier as far as we're concerned in terms of the nature of the piece.
Almost as bad as the sheep and the shepherd.
Yeah.
But,
which again stems back to not having a particular focus. It's just anything that we like well enough to get into.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think maybe the setting was what might have helped you the impression of the piece, because when they were at the museum, the pieces just had a different kind of quality, even though a lot of the artists were artists we were familiar with, but I don't know. I felt like the artwork just presented really well there. I remember getting to meet Ian Miller when they were at the museum. That was the one I bought a couple pieces, small ink pieces from him there, and I really enjoyed meeting like Eric Velhagen there. But their artwork just had a different presence at the museum.
Yes.
I doesn't take anything away from it, but boy, it
No.
was a very nice space.
We ended up with a few pieces coming up shortly here for people we had never heard of before. We'd never seen their art, no experience with it previously, but it was like, wow, look at that. That could really help. Right. Which I think one of them is next. Speaking of Eric Velhagen,
I hate to say that I didn't preview the artwork series. I kind of like coming into these a little bit, with I didn't even read the full outline he wrote, but Velhagen is a guy whose work I've always appreciated. I was there with a guy who was working on IBA with me, and he was trying to decide between two major purchases, and Velhagen, and I don't remember who the other person is. It's probably good better that I don't. But he said, which one would you buy? And I explained why I would pick the Velhagen over the other artists, and he bought the Velhagen. And he got it. I just think Eric has a very unique eye, and I'm sure you do too.
His work was very different for us and to us, because a lot of it is very suggestive as opposed to strictly detailed. There's not every last hair painted kind of thing. Not the sort of work that we're typically drawn to, but everything we'd seen of his we really liked. We were too late for one piece that we really wanted. That was already sold, and we were fortunate enough to get in and get a couple, this one and another one that I don't think we're showing here, but but very different style. But again, just incredibly evocative stuff. When you look at it, it has such a mood to it.
And there's always, rather than just being, say, a depiction of a forest monster or whatever, Eric's always got there's a story behind it, and you're looking at these, and you've got these three little fairies there, and you can just see the one in the back is going, "Ooh, is she going to touch it?"
Yeah,
and it's just amazing. It's it really, you just look at it and go, "Wow." And
when you realize that you've never thought of mermaids being eaten by sharks, and you're looking at a piece of these sharks facing. I would never think of that, but it's so interesting to look at it. This is great stuff, and a wonderful man too. He's just a great guy to know. He's always
absolutely. Some of my best conversations at IX shows have been with Eric. He's such a pleasant man and very humble.
Yes.
Yeah. I love it. I mean, I remember one of my favorite pieces of his is that the Balrog piece, falling off the cliff. I don't know. I think that might have been one of the. It was on display at the museum, I think. But either way, he's
no, wonderful stuff. And I think we've got a couple of newcomers to us coming up still. This is a David Palumbo piece, Julie's oldest son. And it was originally a commission. This is a commission, but it was originally a commission we had in mind for another artist. It just didn't come about. And we eventually thought it would be a good one for David. So we approached him. He took our original concept and rough sketch and reworked it completely into a much more interesting manner.
Yeah.
And it worked out beautifully in the end. And another very different piece for us in a way, but also kind of along the same lines as what we would ordinarily do. He mentioned it was actually kind of a fun piece to work on because you got to put the main figure on the left, whereas ordinarily for a wraparound cover or something like that, they'd be on the right.
Yeah. And he was used to, all his commissions and a lot of the jobs were for paperback covers or whatever, and so it was a vertical, not a horizontal piece. So
it's fun.
That's beautiful. Wow. So you actually handed him a sketch. Was it a landscape when you gave it to him?
Yes, originally we had it in mind as a horizontal piece, but the original drawing was her facing the other way, very different pose, very different atmosphere in a tent with a little brazier and things like that. And he redid it completely and did a much better job of it. So it was good. That's great.
Oh, days, right? Yes.
Yeah. So this was the early IlluxCon days, and again, didn't know who Mike was, but he just had a bunch of really, really nice pieces there. And this piece was a piece he did for the master's class, and so it was a personal piece, and they had to get all their. I think they had
two criteria.
Yeah, I think they had two choices, Joan of Arc, and there was something else I can't remember, and so they had to give a master reference shots and things like that, and then come ready to work. And so it was a personal piece for Mike, and he had it as not for sale. And again, it's something that Neil and I very, very rarely do, but we did sort of badger him a little bit about it, because usually
feel badly about that,
but Mike did. He caved at the end of the show there and sold it to us, and we're so happy. And it's interesting too, because Mike does prints, as many artists do, of their paintings. And my wife and I have another couple of good friends, and when they saw Joan on the wall, they were really excited. So they ordered a print. So when I go to their house, I see Joan on the wall there as well.
Yeah, I like. There's a lot of things to love about Michael's work, but one of them is his choice of dimensions and format. Right, a lot of his pieces are narrow and tall, but not absurdly so.
No,
just enough to really set his pieces off from other artists, within the same space. And so they're beautiful, and then they have this other, his sensibility and the canvas dimensions that I've just always really admired. And again, another guy who's just so much fun to talk to, and incredibly talented.
But there were so many people at IlluxCon that we didn't know, which isn't a slight on them. It's actually our ignorance rather than that they weren't names or whatever. But everywhere you turned, there was somebody we'd never heard of with gorgeous work of some kind. If you had a fortune to spend, you could spend it easily, and you could come away with all kinds of stuff. I think at almost every show in the early days there, you could have bought a piece from everyone in there and been happy. There were maybe only a couple of people that we didn't care for their style or whatever. But
well, I joked with Pat Wilshire there that I said you should institute the extra executive membership package where you get a piece from everybody included with your
Yeah.
ticket, because you could just go around and
yeah.
just shop your brains out.
Yeah, no, that's a show where I always had the mindset to be a good patron. I wanted to make sure that I tried to buy, you know, I never have a lot of money, but if I only had $3,000 to go there, I wanted to make sure that I at least got 8 pieces, right? Because I wanted to patronize as many artists as I could, you know, because it just made me feel good, right? You're buying direct from the artist, and I wanted to walk away with you know, a few pieces from the show back at the hotel, but also, you know, pieces from the main exhibit too.
We exhibited some iron self-control in a couple of years and didn't actually come away with a piece, but it was pretty tough. And there at every show there was something that you could certainly call tempting. Luckily, a few of the pieces we wanted we couldn't afford, so that made that a little
easier. Yeah, that's the problem there too. Is you know, there are a lot of affordable. Michael's work is very affordable, or at least it was back when I first was looking at him. But yeah, there's, you know, you have a lot of people who have been in the business a long time who like Omar Rayan, who I love his work. I could never afford one of his bigger paintings. I've got a few watercolors on the wall. Because I had to have a good example, you know, from him, but that's okay. That's the great thing about IX is that most of the artists will bring, you know, if most of their pieces are 3,000 and up, you're going to have a few opportunities to buy lesser pieces, but just wonderful.
Well, this was another artist completely new to us, Volkan Bagat, our first ILXCon there. Didn't know anything about his work. He had just gotten these pieces back from the publisher in time to bring to the show. And as you know, they put red dots on the pieces as they're sold, so you know that the piece is no longer available. His table was like the measles, all these dots appearing, and this was almost the only piece left after a couple of days. We kept looking at it and thinking, well, why would we buy this? We don't know anything about
magic cards
or anything. But it was such a beautiful piece, and by the end of it, we thought we're going to go away with that, or we're going to make up our mind sooner. We're not going home with it, and we did end up picking it up. And it's just an outstanding piece to look at in person. It's gorgeous work. Don't really know the other work that he's done that well, but this one we just couldn't resist.
And we were at the show with other good friends that are our pulp buddies and sort of fellow convention people too. But so we're sitting around dinner with them, and so they go, well, it's a magic card, and so they're on their phones looking around. Well, here it is, and this is ours. So we ended up buying one off of eBay just to have the card with it.
Sure.
And he was kind enough to do the sketch back for us as well. And then after the fact too, we asked if he had the transfer drawing, because he had a couple there, and so he said he did. He thought he still had it at home back in Germany. So we ended up cutting a deal with him, and it was interesting that the face on the sort of where it started, she was quite stern and you know, a bit sort of harder looking, and I guess they just asked him to soften her up a little bit. So it's fun to have that, with it.
You see the image on the magic card, and it's this tiny little square from the middle that's about 2 inches wide, and you think this gorgeous, beautiful painting that is not wasted exactly, but was painted for the sake of the art rather than worrying so much about exactly what it was going to be done in the final. Yeah, that was a great piece to acquire. Very excited.
I remember wanting to get something from Volkan when he was at the museum, and I just couldn't hold it. I couldn't afford it. You know? Because the painted pieces were just a little out of reach, right? In there.
Yeah.
Well, that was the most expensive piece at his table too, and we were thinking, oh, great,
so that would have to be left.
But it was definitely a purchase well made.
Here we are. Now, this is our art director phase. That we shot. We have to admit some embarrassment.
Fortunately, we're good friends now. And
Patrick Jones was one of the people we met at ILXCon as well in the early stages there. And we really enjoyed his work, but there were 2 problems. One was they were too big. And secondly, he just didn't quite have something that we wanted. But we just weren't accustomed to really large pieces, and he did work fairly big. But we got talking to him, and we ended up chatting a few times. And then we finally settled on the idea that, yes, we were going to commission something, which for us was our first major painting commission. So we had some concerns about how it was going to go, whether it was going to work, what it would end up being. But this is actually the second piece that we got from him. But it went very well. We had a lot of input, much to his chagrin, I'm sure. But part of the difference here was that what we had in mind and what he had in mind were slightly different. So trying to get exactly the intent of the piece was a bit of a challenge, because he had a different vision of the girl, where it was a sort of a more romanticized view of her, as opposed to she's right in the thick of it fighting. But we did end up getting the pieces that we wanted. Couldn't be happier with them. They're just absolutely magnificent to see in person.
Patrick's such a great guy too. So
he's wonderful to deal with.
We stay in touch, even though we haven't been seeing each other.
The first piece nearly gave us a coronary when it arrived, though, because the pieces are 2 feet by 3 feet. So he had taken them off the stretcher frame, rolled them in a tube, shipped them in a tube from Australia, which was a great way to send it in this indestructible tube. But what happened with the first one is there was still enough wetness to the paint that the bubble wrap that he had wrapped it in left this like octopus perfect layer of bubble marks on the painting. Wow. We freaked out completely, but we took it to our restorer, and she said not to worry. She was going to heat it up and revarnish it, and it would take it out, which it did, fortunately.
Yeah.
And after that, we learned that instead of having the bubble wrap touch the painting, we'd use release paper, silicone release paper, which doesn't adhere to it. But when we got it out of the tube, it was sort of a moment's absolute horror there, when we thought it was permanently ruined with this mark.
Did you pick up the phone and call Patrick?
No, we called the restorer, of course.
Yeah. And then afterwards, we mentioned to Patrick that we've got some paper you should use.
After the first one, then we commissioned this one as the second piece from him, and we had a very definite idea again of what we wanted. And the main event was that skeleton. We just had to have that skeleton fighting there, and he did such an incredible job on it. It's such a great piece to see in person. It's a real beautiful
kind of
throwback,
right?
Yeah. And with all Patrick's pieces, then the ornamentation, the jewelry on the women, the like helmet, and the way he treats the metal work and whatever is just astounding. Yes, so even though we were fairly fixed on exactly how we wanted the content, we definitely wanted Patrick to go to town and do his thing on the details.
And, it was a lot of fun from start to finish. A little nerve-wracking in the first instance, because we just had never done a piece of that scale before in terms of a painting commission. But he did a marvelous job for it, and we really appreciate the work that he put in. Those are
and his
patience with our art direction too. But, that was a rare instance for us where we did get exactly what we wanted out of it, and couldn't ask for anything better.
Well, Patrick's somebody who I loved his work, and when I took over working on Infected by Art was the second volume, and I made sure Patrick's work was on the cover when we had to go through the approval process to figure out what image I wanted to use. And Patrick's was the one. I couldn't have anything but his. But now here's something totally different, right? Something from Doug Sneed.
Yes. Well, this was again one of those nasty shocks you get sometimes in course of collecting. We had loved his stuff. We had Playboy subscription for many years, the 80s and 90s. Loved his work and the cartoons there, but had no idea that he lived like an hour and a half from us. We assumed he was from the US and that he was an American guy. And when that came up accidentally, when we saw some stuff posted online, it was like
what?
This can't possibly be. We did end up visiting a number of times, had great visits with him and Heidi up in their place in Aurelia. And we did end up purchasing 2 pieces originally from him, and then 2 more subsequently a number of years later. But they are also classic instances of work that looks so much more nuanced when you see it in person rather than when you're looking at a scan of it or even a reproduction. The quality of Playboy's reproduction was pretty good, but it's nothing compared to the original art.
And the other interesting thing is that with the 2 published cartoon pieces, we were able to acquire all the roughs that he did, which we really like the process as well. So anytime we've commissioned anything, we sort of always ask for, we'll pay for them, but the prelims, color studies, whatever you want to do, could we have it too at the end? But the number of changes he made on these things, it was insane.
And get it just right.
But then when you see it, you're going, it was worth it. It was, you could go, okay, well, it's gone from, sort of 3/4 of a cigar to a half a cigar, back to 3/4 of a cigar and whatever, and now
it works.
Yeah, and then you're going, but yeah, it's way better that way.
Yeah. The other part that was embarrassing when we finally got onto him is I always thought it was frayed. I thought that was an F, not an S.
Yeah,
it's got that hard edge there. So we even contacted Playboy at one point saying, could you give us contact information of this guy? And they didn't know we were talking about because I got his name wrong. But yeah, that was an incredible experience to find that they lived so near to us and to make a number of visits.
Many visits up there. Again, another example of people being very, very kind, very gracious, and just
they are wonderful couple. Yeah, they would set up at San Diego Comic-Con with Steve Morger. The booth that he had there, and so and of course they had a calf gallery as well. So when I met them the first time at San Diego, they were so appreciative of having the opportunity to use calf to sell their artwork, and we corresponded a lot. I mean, I know that he's kind of not working, but they'd send me books with little sketches in them. I love them immensely, and it was a pleasure getting to meet him because his work is just incredible.
I think about sitting there in that house, beautiful house they had there for 40 years, doing that as a career. That just would have been bliss. Obviously, there are problems with deadlines and other issues and things like that. It's never quite as good as it looks from the outside, but just to have that sort of a career, to be able to do that and produce that great work for that many years. But yeah, that is also somewhat different for us, although kind of along some of the similar lines.
Sure. So where do we go from here? I think we're going into you had a
modern
period.
era.
Yes.
Yes, I think we're into the modern era of comic art at the next stage here.
Yes, that's a good idea.
To prepare for it here so that we're braced for the impact. Now, again, I apologize for the number of images we were trying to inflict on you here, but we did kind of want to do more of a retrospective of the last few decades, if we could.
Yeah, and now show lots of art, because that's what it's all about.
And now we get into our more recent years purchasing, where we had a bit of a lull in the early 2000s, where we weren't really looking at that much new comics or comic art, weren't really buying too many pieces. And then all of a sudden, I guess around 2006 or 7, we got heavily interested in the art again, which for us was relatively new, because now we're into modern era work that doesn't have the word balloons on it, which was a bit of a transition for us mentally. But once you've made it, then you can really appreciate how the art looks without the type on it. But we started seeing David Finch art. We got back into Jim Leigh. We started seeing new artists to us, like J. Scott Campbell and Anacleto, however that's pronounced. And a lot of it had been out there for a number of years, but we just hadn't been seeing it.
Yeah.
And once we had seen it, it was like, wow, this is great. But it also made the jump forward in that we had a number of options now in terms of online sources, and you've got auctions, and you've got galleries like CAF, and you've got various dealers that we weren't familiar with before, like Albert Moy and Anthony's site. All of a sudden, we're seeing all this stuff, and there are all these options. And it made a substantial jump forward for us in terms of pieces that we were able to acquire.
Yeah.
And what was so you had the lull for like 4 or 5 or 6 years, but I mean, do you remember what the first piece was that kind of got you reinterested in diving back into things?
I think it was seeing David's work, and then finding out that he was a fellow Canadian.
Yes, which was also a bit of a shock. But I think in terms of us getting back interested in it, he was first, because the first stuff we started seeing from him was shortly before the DC New 52, and that would have been around 2010, 2011. A little bit before that, we were seeing the Marvel work that he had done, that we hadn't seen it at the time, but we were seeing it on a sort of a secondary basis and really getting excited about that. I'm not sure if that was the first purchase, but it might have been. It would have been one of the pages directly from him, probably the Batman stuff from
or at the New Jersey show from Albert, maybe.
Yes, possibly too.
Yeah, so it was and we got 3 Dark Knight pieces from Albert there, and it was sort of Scott Williams inks on David. And, that was lovely stuff.
But that was a real shock to us, to realize that there was a lot of good art going on in comics that we didn't really care about, and that we did buy some of them, we didn't buy others, but there was a lot of really good work going on that we just had no idea was happening. And we had already missed a lot of David's work from Marvel and from that slightly previous era there. For him, that we got caught up on later, but too late to acquire a piece directly or even to get work from elsewhere. And one of the unfortunate things that we had missed there was Jim Lee and Scott Williams on the Hush storyline.
Yeah.
Ended up reading that in trade paperback form several years after it was originally published. Loved it, but we didn't know about Albert at the time, didn't know the pages had come and gone, didn't really have an opportunity to get one. And that hung over us for quite some time until just recently, actually, which is at the very end.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll get into that when we get there. Now, a few of the collectors we know have said, get one piece from an artist and you're done.
Done in one.
Yeah.
We don't been your mantra.
No, we don't look at it that
Not
way.
ever.
We could have any number of good pieces from somebody, but this, however, is a little bit of a different piece for us.
Well, picked it up again from a local collector who is also a CAF member and again, all-around great guy, hosts an annual gathering that we're privileged to go to. But this is a Brian Stelfree's piece from the first issue of Gun Candy, and it's huge.
Yes.
And it's all on one board too. It's not taped together art pages, and it's just it's amazing. And I had the privilege of chatting with Brian at OAX this year. He was sitting beside David at Essential Sequentials table there, and I said I have to ask, and so I told him the story, and he said, yeah. So he was involved with that project, and they launched it, I believe, at San Diego, and so they made posters of this. So he did up a big piece, whereas only about half of it is used for the cover itself. And it's the way he's left the bits out and float. It makes sense when you see the printed piece, but it's a beautiful piece as it is, but it's kind of funky to look at.
Yeah, but it's so clean. The inking is just so
gorgeous.
smooth. It's so slick. It's a great job. Wonderful.
Yeah, his quality of line. I mean, it's fun to see. You know, his color work, of course, is astounding, right? But his line work is really what I've always appreciated, because he's so clean. He does so much with so little, and then so I like this piece a lot. I like the fact that he's leaving a bit. I mean, I'm sure, like you said, but it's colored, you understand it a bit more. But but no, I
need it. Yeah,
he could have drawn it all in, but he just didn't.
Right.
The Coles Phillips attitude there, that those pieces he had where he left stuff out. Yeah, so that was a bit of a different piece for us too, but that was a lot of fun. Now this Michael Turner Chaos Reign cover, he had passed away shortly before that, or a year or two before that, and I guess whoever was repping him or had pieces brought some pieces up here to one of the shows. Didn't know his work at all, didn't really have any feel for it, but just absolutely loved what they had, and this one in particular. This one we don't have any longer either, but it was a bit odd in a way. We did decide to let go of it at one point. We put it out for auction and it didn't sell. It didn't hit the reserve of the $3,000 that we had paid for it. So we ended up getting it back, and we held it for another couple of years. We thought, okay, we'll have another try at it. And it sold for over 10 when it went. Just that couple of years gap in between, the prices had just gone nuts on his work, and it went crazy. But not as slickly detailed or as sharply detailed as Anacleto, but beautifully drawn in pencil, just absolutely beautiful pencil work. I don't think there is an inked version. I think it was used right off the pencils, so I could be wrong on that. But it doesn't need it. It's so wonderfully done on its own.
Yeah, agreed. Turner's another one of those artists who are on my list. One day to get something. But
and the longer you wait, the more you'll regret that, or the more it will cost you.
Yes, exactly. That's what the dealers tell you when you're looking at something, and it's $5,000. Like, it's just a little bit too much. If you wait, they'll tell you, if you wait a couple of years, it's going to be 7 or 8. You might as well buy it now.
The problem is when you don't have the money now, then it's kind of irrelevant what it's going to cost in the future.
And they'll tell you it's underpriced right then too.
That's right.
I love it. That's part of the kind of showmanship, gamesmanship that happens when you're trying to figure things out. But here you go, Finch and Weems, another
Weems, Well, we're excited to get this piece. Tatiana had it up on her website, and it was pricier than we could do. And,
we were uncomfortable with it,
and a little more than we thought might fetch, but we just really loved it. The work was gorgeous, and so again, one of the rare times we've actually sort of reached out to the artist and haggled a bit.
Not to look too cheap, but
but they were again very agreeable, and we got it for an affordable price. Still stiff, but affordable.
Love it.
And just really love it. And the story behind that was it was David's pencils. It was done for a demonstration. Nomon, I think, was the
tutorial.
Company that put the tutorial out. And so I don't know whether they told David it was going to be inked as a second tutorial on inking or not, but according to Joe, he'd done it on sort of paper that was unfavorable to be inked. So Joe had to sort of go off and do it directly onto the board. But the work is just absolutely gorgeous. And when we spoke to David afterwards too, he said he never got the pencils back. So
I'd love to see it.
Yeah,
I'd certainly love to see the pencil from that piece because it's so detailed and it's so intricate. But this too it's all one of those reminders that first of all, you need a good combination of pencil and inker for the styles to match. But secondly, one of the great difficulties of inking is bringing things forward and backward in terms of its dimensionality. And a piece that complicated, I can't imagine how you would tackle that. But Joe's done an incredible job on making that work.
Yeah, Scott Williams for us too is a real master of that, because some of the things that Jim draws, and we've got a double-page spread, the Justice League, where there's so much going on that it would just be confusion if it wasn't for that skill.
I completely agree. There's a lot of historical, inkers we can cite that didn't do the proper service to the pen.
Yeah,
a lot of it too is not necessarily that they weren't good in their own right. It was just the wrong combination. Especially you take somebody like Gene Colan for the old days. Well, his work is so difficult to ink because of the nature of his pencil work that there are only going to be a few people who are going to look just right on him, especially on particular titles. And you talk about Tomb of Dracula there with Tom Palmer inking. There just isn't anybody else that could have drawn that book and made it successful. It wouldn't have worked. Well, this one was, I think, definitely one of the earliest pieces we got directly from David.
Yeah.
We once we found out that he was a fellow Ontarian, we made the trip out there to visit him, and this was one, I think, a piece that we had seen or had just seen in the comics or was coming out shortly, but just such beautiful work in terms of the quality of it, the dimensionality of it. And that was Scott inking him for a very brief period right before the New 52 restart. There was a mini-series, I think, of 5 issues of The Dark Knight, and then they restarted it back to #1. Scott, I think, did the first 3 or 3.5 issues. And again, a testimonial to Scott's skill that it doesn't end up looking like Jim Lee. It ends up looking like David Finch, but Scott's just brought such an added dimension to the work. It was really a wonderful piece. So that we couldn't resist. That was a good one.
I love the just the little inset panel.
Yeah.
That sets the mood perfectly.
And there's even a self-portrait there. David is the guy with a gun in the back, sort of third from the left there. Yeah, so that's him. Yeah.
Well, the only one without hair. Yeah.
This one. This one we got from Essential Sequential. There it was a variant cover for a mini-series there. We waffled for weeks about this piece. And afterwards, when we got it, we thought, why did we wait? Like, what were we thinking? But yeah, it's actually David's first published version of Red Sonja, I think. He's done some subsequently, but I think that was the first one of her that he had done that saw for an actual cover. But again, just such incredibly beautiful work, and it's so dynamic to look at. It's such a striking piece when you see it in person.
Yeah, and it's interesting too for for all of the the dimensionality and great enhancement that Scott brought to David's pencils with the Batman pieces there. Then David started inking his own work, and it's amazing. It's really, really great, to the point where actually we saw Scott Williams at our Toronto Fan Expo, and he was the first one that said, have you seen David's? Because we complimented him on David's ink, saying we're big fans, and he said, have you seen David inking himself? It's awesome. He's really doing a great job.
But one of the really horrifying parts when we saw it in process is that it's not really inking himself. The pencils are incredibly minimal. The vast majority of the drawing is straight in pen. There's a vague outline of things just to give them the rough structure and breakdown. All of the detail is done straight in ink. It's incredible when you look at it.
And so Dave is somebody you don't mind having multiple pieces from.
Yes, yeah. That's not a one and done thing by any stretch of the imagination. Definitely not. Could own as many as we could fit on the walls and be happy. But.
And not to sound like a broken record, but another classic. What a wonderful guy!
Yeah,
David.
Great guy.
Just
wonderful.
fantastic, lovely person.
Yeah, that's been great.
Yeah, he gave the best quote at OAX. That's why I like the little promo video I have on the YouTube channel. He's the one who starts off the whole thing, because he's you know, it was just perfect. He's like, he's very pleasant, and yeah. So yeah, this is gorgeous.
Yeah. Aha. Yes. You take that.
All right. So we picked that up at our Toronto Fan Expo from David. It was one of those complicated things, but he had a big lineup. He was doing he was signing posters and things like that, and so it was like this monster lineup. But we could see that there was a portfolio on his table, and so we're trying desperately not to look like we're crashing the line or whatever, but kind of ducked around the corner and said, David, and just, sign language pointing at the folio, and he sort of waves us in and that sort of thing. We, sort of glance at the first person in line there, give them a smile, and just dart over for the folio there. So we're looking at this, and this piece is, it's really amazing, Danny Mickey inks. And so in the end, we're going, oh, I wonder. So we asked him how much it was, and we misheard what he said, and what we thought he said made sense. It was a fairly stiff price, but yeah, we were kind of humming and hawing. We went away, sort of circled around, came back again, and then so we said, how much again? And then he said it. I heard it
so that we could hear it.
Yeah. And it was lower than we thought. And when and then I said, was that Canadian or US? Because usually we would just assume US, but we were in Canada. And said, even better now. But
at this point, it's not going to get any cheaper.
No. And so we said, well, at that price, we don't have the cash on us, but we would be happy to, to get it to you, And he said, sure. But he said, well, take it. And so we managed to take the piece and go home with it, and then go visit and pay them after the fact. And it was hilarious too, because when we posted it in the CAF gallery there, then we got a comment on it by the guy who was in line at the show, saw the transaction go, and he said, yeah, it was interesting too, because he said, David, I'm not sure he explained exactly what happened quite accurately to Meredith when
it was a little unusual in terms of arrangements. I mean, we knew him well enough at that point that I think he was confident that he was going to get the money, but to walk off with it without having a deposit or anything was a little unusual.
Yeah.
And after it happened, it was on the long weekend, and after we got home with it, Leigh's wife Joanne was saying, well, get on the phone and make an arrangement to go and pay with it. And we're thinking, well, we'll wait till after the show.
We don't want to bug him. He's got his family. It's the last weekend of the summer. And
then suddenly thinking afterwards, maybe we should get him on the phone. Just let him know. It worked out fine in the end. And it turned out to be actually the catalyst for a few other pages that we got for him that we saw when we went out for a visit to pick this one up, which we otherwise wouldn't have known about because they weren't in his portfolio. So that was incredibly fortunate as well.
Yeah.
So it goes to show you that you should buy as much as you can, because it may lead to other purchases as well. So there is that. Speaking of which, this being one of them that it led to is that we had not seen this cover or this piece previously until we ended up seeing it at David's there when we went out for a visit with him and Meredith, and it's such a phenomenal piece to see in person. Didn't know anything about the comic. Personally, I think Moon Knight and Conan is a bit of an odd combination, but it's a two pages put together, and in order to give him enough room to put the amount of detail in that he wanted. Love his version of Moon Knight. Don't care for the character per se. It's not one that thrills me, but love his rendition of it. love Conan and a good rendition of Conan. That one we just had to have. So that we had no idea was around until we were actually staring at it and just couldn't come away without it.
Again, David Zing's on himself and Franklin Booth background there with the clouds.
That's an astonishing piece to see in person. You really have to see it in the flesh to really appreciate it.
And just the extra size, as it's just over here.
Yes.
The extra size, gave David just that bit of extra room to work, and it just really sings.
Do you ask him if the price is in U.S. and Canadian every time you pick up something?
No. We kind of bite the bullet and take what
or we preface the conversation by saying, which currency would you like to talk in?
Right. Very wise.
Typically, if people aren't familiar with it, the exchange from U.S. to Canadian dollars is anywhere from a quarter to like 50%. So a dollar in U.S. is usually $1.30 to $1.50 here. So we don't earn in U.S. dollars, so it generally hurts when you're making the conversion.
Another piece by Jay.
Yeah.
Yes, one of our first.
I think that is the first piece of his.
I think it is. Yes.
Yeah. But yeah,
a Deja Thoris cover.
Yeah, couldn't resist just the amount of incredible detail and the beautiful work and everything. We just looking at that stuff thinking, good Lord, you can't get enough of it.
Yeah, I mean he's amazing with a pencil, right? I mean he's just incredibly gifted.
Yeah, and it's so clean. The work, there's no smudging, there's no underlying drawing, there's nothing. It's just so clean. Yeah. It's amazing. And actually, in our opinion, probably shouldn't say this out loud, but for the price, I think his work is very undervalued.
Yeah.
When you look at the quality of it and how much detail he's put in, how good the detail alone doesn't warrant price, but good detail does. And his work, I think, is relatively underpriced compared to what it should be on the market.
And especially if you get, a cover from one of the independent magazines where it's not as big a name character and whatever, the price you pay is just, it's so low compared to the quality that I think it's an art collector's dream in a way, because virtually anybody could probably afford a gorgeous piece from Jay.
Yeah,
agreed. Let's see.
And again, another classic example of not a particularly big name brand character, beautiful work, relatively inexpensive to acquire. And when you look at it in person with the detail and everything there is and how cleanly it's handled, it's just wonderful stuff to see. Don't know the character, know who it is, know the name, but don't know anything about it. Don't read the comics, but don't care. It doesn't influence anymore, not knowing what that's all about.
Oh, well, it's the art speaks to you guys. I mean, I think that's important. Well, especially when you go back to IX, right? There's so much artwork that you don't know where it came from, but if you love it, you're going to buy it. Like you said, you bought the Vulcan piece, right? You don't play Magic the Gathering, neither do I. But we have an appreciation for the art just the same. And when the art speaks to you, you gotta give it a try.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, what it is a big deal. Like especially you see the pricing of some pages, then if it's a page from a significant storyline or it's the first appearance of so-and-so or whatever, that has a big impact on the value. For us, we don't really care. We don't look at it from that angle. We look at it, do we like the art well enough? And if we do, we don't really care what it's from or whether it's anything in particular.
We understand, if somebody's well known for Batman or Spider-Man or whatever, that a Batman piece will probably be more expensive, say, than an Aquaman piece. But if you stare at the piece and go, I love that, then it's for you.
Especially down a little further there, not that the view we have isn't good, but the detail in the bow and the portion of her costume down below there. You just wonder how you get in there and get all of that happening. And it's very dimensional, very 3D as well. It definitely sings in terms of the of things being in front of the others and the roundness of everything.
Well, he has a very he draws what he sees. I mean, the way he's drawing these hands, he's not drawing outlines there. He's kind of following along with. It's just true. It has. I wouldn't say it's a photo quality, but his style has.
Yeah, it has that kind of intensity. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Now this to us is the classic example of inexpensive great art. It's so beautiful to look at. There is so much going on, and it's so intricate. But it's a nothing title. Forgive me to the publisher, but it's to look at it. It's just an experience unto itself.
And it's one of those things too where you can keep on looking at it. I mean, above her is sort of like the magic mirror or whatever, being held by chains by these guys, and there's Dracula in there, and you know, there's all sorts of stuff going on in the background. And, you know, sometimes you walk past and you go, "Did I see that before?" I'm looking again, and it's not that I haven't looked at it. But
and with the way things are done currently, you figure he would have drawn one of those statues on the side, and then they would just flop it and duplicate it digitally in the actual finished product. But it's all drawn straight on there. It's none of it is copied and pasted or anything like that. But this was a quite inexpensive piece for the amount of work and the detail, just because again, it isn't really a title that I think anybody was really busting for, the Blood Queen versus Dracula. The work itself, though, is outstanding. It really does call to you when you're looking at it. Which doesn't mean we're going to sell it cheap one day, but we'll have the big buck for it when the time comes. But.
Exactly. Jay's got Campbell, right? Can't go wrong. I mean, his detail work was beautiful. This is a fantastic piece.
And in pencil, no less.
Yeah. We were fortunate enough to pick that up when Mitch was repping Campbell at the time. Got that directly from Mitch, along with a Gen 13 3D cover with Big T-Rex, and I just absolutely loved the work, and it was great.
In the early stages for us with Campbell, we hadn't seen a lot of his work, but the few things that I had seen, I found a little too cartoony. Some of them wasn't quite the style that we liked. This one just has that extra dimension of sexiness that really worked for us. And then subsequently, we saw a lot more of his work and thought, oh, okay, well, it's not all the way we thought it was, and there were quite a few pieces that we really liked. But that was, I think that calendar piece is the only one that was done in pencil. The others he ended up inking the subsequent ones.
We were fortunate to have two friends who were down in San Diego for the next year, and we were able to get some images of what Mitch had on offer, and we were able to scoop some things remotely, which was great.
One of them, I think, is coming up next, if I remember the order correctly. But, well, I had an incredibly slow internet connection at the time, and our friends got there early, and they took photos to send to us, and it took forever for them to come through. And we're sitting there at the desk knowing that we are not going to have a lot of time on this, or somebody else is going to get in there and buy them, pounding on the table trying to make it go faster so that we were going to want them. But luckily, we did get in early enough that we were able to get 3 pieces through them and deal with Mitch over the phone, which was great, and secure the 3 of them that we really wanted. But this one is another one of those ones we really have to see it in person. There's so much going on, and there's so much detail. And I found myself at one point looking at that broom thinking, I never thought we would own a great piece of broom art, but there it is. And it's great the way that it's drawn in the flying monkeys. I don't have a thing about any of the actual content per se. We're not fans of the Wizard of Oz or any of that, but just this art is great. It's wonderful stuff.
Wow. And are these, what size are they?
11-17.
Yeah.
They're 11-17? Okay.
Yeah. And that's one thing too. He didn't do the calendars for very long, and you don't see too many good pieces from the calendars come out. Some of the, I hate to say it, some of the weaker ones will make the rounds, but you rarely see one of those sort of the really A-list pieces come out.
I was quite surprised that there was a new one this year. He had mentioned when we met him at one of the shows when we were talking about these, he mentioned that he had almost done another one that never saw print. We thought he was fluffing that a little bit because he hadn't actually done it. But then several years later now, lo and behold, another one appears. So whether he had done most of the pieces previously and he just finished it off, or whether he had sat down to do a new one, I don't know. But it's such incredible Campbell art that, to me, it's an amazing thing that it isn't the most demand or the stuff that's in the most demand. But generally speaking, there you run into that same thing where published covers for variant covers on Marvel main characters seem to be the ones that are driving the price as far as his work is concerned. not
Right.
necessarily, strictly speaking, how much art you've got per square inch.
I think that's that's very true, right? Newer cover from him could go for 10, 12, 15. Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying.
Yeah, this was the 3D comic dinosaur art there, which was another classic example of a piece that we put up for sale, couldn't get the price that we wanted, which I thought was modest. And then a few years later, when the prices had jumped up on his, we got twice that of what we couldn't get a few years before. But
yeah, Sandra Hope inks on that one.
Yes.
She did a lovely job, I thought.
Yeah, she did a really nice job. That was a tough one to let go.
It was,
that
yeah.
that was tough.
It was very fun to to look at, but yeah, it
eventually
it funded something else.
Yeah. Now this one again, when you get into
your Ink Schultz, right?
Yes, yeah. When you get into Mark Schultz pieces, again, as we were talking about before, there the difficulty of finding the right piece. This one, it wasn't quite the content we wanted because we still really wanted a good Hannah and Jack piece with a dinosaur, but the work itself really sings. And this one I couldn't resist. We actually got it in a part trade, part sale deal with another calf collector, as a matter of fact. But it has a lot of what we wanted from Schultz in terms of the quality of the brushwork and that dry brush content and the detail and how interesting a piece it is. But it still didn't quite scratch that final itch, which luckily we were able to do relatively recently anyway.
That's fantastic. You know, it's like a Frazetta composition with some Corbin stylings in it.
Yeah, you got the skull down at the bottom, so you've got it all kind of.
Yeah, I love this piece. It's beautiful.
Now, I've never been able to locate these Strange Passages comic or whatever it is that it's supposed to be from. I don't know if it was ever actually published. It's supposed to be the cover of an issue of that, whether it was an internet thing or maybe it was something that came and went. But I don't know for sure if it's actually out there in finished or published form. It says it is in the book, but I haven't been able to find it.
Well, here you
go. There it is.
Great.
That's it. Now we're done. That's it. Close up our tent. We're finished. But
yeah. So as you were saying, it was surprising that it is a more recent piece, but it works back a little bit to the stuff that really made us love Mark's work.
The only thing that could have been better would have been a Tyrannosaur in the background, which we kind of had hopes for, but it still covers all the bases. We've got Dinosaur, we've got Hannah and Jack, we've got a great overall image, we've got that beautiful brushwork, we got a couple of frogs, which we didn't necessarily need, but they're down there. But, no, that one we got at the same time. We got the pencil piece that we saw previously directly from Mark through the Flesk website. There was a surprise to see a piece like that posted and still be there 30 seconds later when we got on the phone. That one for us was a real blessing to pick up a piece like that.
That's it's lovely. It really is. Wow. Let's see. I have no idea where we're going next, but Jim Leigh.
We're almost done. Actually, we're down to the nitty gritty here as far as that's concerned.
So we, as we were saying, we sort of came a little late for the Hush era, but we started to sort of follow Albert's postings quite closely and picked up a number of pieces from the New 52. So the double-page spread from the Justice League there, and pretty much every character in there. So
except for Cyborg, who hadn't joined the team at that point.
Right. Yeah. So we picked up a couple of interior pages as well, and just gorgeous work. Really love looking at that again. Scott manages to pull everybody sort of into their appropriate positions in the foreground with all the chaos in the background, and it's an amazing piece.
At that time too, you didn't have long to think about it before pages were sold. It was really hard at the time. It was leaping off the table. We had hopes for a cover, but they were a little outside the price range we were willing to go, and it didn't matter. They were gone by the time you could get on the phone. The stuff was just flying out the door.
Yeah, Jim's stuff, is not cheap, but it doesn't last very long on Albert's side when they do the drops. They just don't, and I'm so happy for Jim to be.
I think it deserves it. It's wonderful work, and it has everything that good comic art should have. Whether you like the style or not is a different thing, but it's great storytelling. It's beautifully drawn. The structure is wonderful. He nails the characters.
Yeah.
The inking is stellar. There's nothing to complain about with any of it. If you don't like it, okay, that's fine. But it really is great comic art. There's no doubt about that.
I agree.
And that was one of the rare, I think, pieces that did stick around on Albert's site. We couldn't really believe it was still there. That was from the All-Star Batman Robin. Yeah. So that's the cover from issue 7.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
And yeah, just absolutely amazing piece.
The only thing that would have been better if it had been Catwoman in the background instead of Black Canary, because at that time we were desperately hoping for a Hush page to turn up with Catwoman. And nothing was happening. Nobody was letting go of anything. And then this came up, and it had almost all of the features we wanted, and such a great dynamic piece with great action and everything. We couldn't resist that one. But yeah, I was surprised to see it still sitting there. I forgot to include a scan of it, but Albert got Jim to throw in a Catwoman head sketch that he did for us as well, which was certainly more than we could have expected. That was wonderful as well. But we did mention to him that we were trying to get a good Catwoman piece. So I'll get Jim to do your sketch. Oh, okay, can't complain about that.
No, not at all.
Albert, no, yeah,
yeah. I love Albert, but he doesn't throw in anything. But I guess Jim threw that in. Albert didn't throw that in.
We didn't know him. Well, we don't know him that well anyway. But I think that was our first dealing with him, or one of the first. Anyway, so we didn't really know what to expect either, but it all went incredibly well, so we couldn't complain.
I tease Albert, just I built his website. We worked together for a very long time, but like the last time I bought something from him, I asked him to throw in free shipping since I was paying 100% of the asking price, and he was like, "No way." Like, am I not your favorite web developer? He said, "It doesn't matter."
It'd be a shame if your website went down, Albert. But,
what would you do?
But again, it's he's a great guy, and obviously reps some pretty amazing artists.
For sure.
Wow.
I think we're almost done here. There should be, I think, one. Yes, okay.
Yes,
this is
the Hush page.
Our grand finale.
Yeah, so we finally did get this Catwoman piece from the Hush era that we wanted. Found out, talking to Scott Williams at the Fan Expo, that he had a piece, and still does, that we coveted, and did reach out a couple of times to see if he would part with it, but he wouldn't. I believe his words were something to the effect of, "I would only accept an offer that would be irresponsible to turn down." So, okay, all right. Well, I guess our pockets are not that deep.
It was wonderful and horrible to suddenly discover that the page you want, here's the guy who has it, but you're not going to pry it out of his hands, which means you've got to look for alternatives. But this was an interesting exercise for us because we had to have a page with Catwoman. Oddly enough, we didn't really care about whether Batwoman was on it. We had to have a good Catwoman page. But when we went back through the collected edition, we were surprised at how few pages there were that we would want to own the original art. The story is a lot of fun. The art is great, and it's a great thing unto itself. But there weren't really that many pages that really tickled us, and none of them were turning up. When this one, which was on the list, finally showed up, it's sort of like, oh, I guess we're going to have that, or we're going to be kind of screwed here. And luckily, it did end up coming our way, which we were very happy with.
Well, fellow Comic Art Fans member has the double page spread that comes right after this, Eric. And my God, that is something we covet. Never be able to own it. Now, obviously, he's not likely to part with it, but it was that would have been the most satisfying Catwoman.
We did reach out to him when we didn't really know what the pricing was and everything, with an offer that we thought was quite generous, and he'd been offered twice that and turned it down, which meant our offer wasn't as generous as we thought. But that put a bit of a spanner into the works of the idea that we were ever going to be able to achieve this. And a few pages started turning up, but they just weren't ones that called to us. And it was getting more and more frustrating that just nothing that was the right thing seemed to be happening. But that we did acquire relatively recently, and that we're very excited again. But that definitely scratched an itch.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know that I would say one and done with that is exactly right, but it's close.
Our bank account saying
yeah, our bank account saying that has enough on there that we wanted that I would say, yeah, I could say that we don't necessarily need another page, but fortunately we probably won't get one anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Right, but if the opportunity presented itself and you could afford it, you wouldn't.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we would certainly
have to consider it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we would certainly consider it.
Yeah.
But one of the things I've been trying to explain to a friend of ours who's getting into it recently too is that part of the process is turning things down or deciding not to buy, because otherwise you tend to just have a knee-jerk reaction when you see things and you want to buy everything that comes across the table. But you do need to be a little more selective. Admittedly, you can acquire some things if you can afford it, maybe sell them later on and possibly even turn a profit on it. But if you don't have an unlimited budget, what most of us, I think, found in the early days is you bought what you could get your hands on, which you enjoyed, but maybe if you'd done something else instead and waited for a more significant piece, your money would have been better spent. And it's hard to gauge that when you're in there and you have no idea what's going to turn up or what isn't going to turn up.
Well, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. But,
and as many people have said, you rarely the pain of overpaying or whatever for a piece is long gone, but the aggravation of the one that got away is lasting.
Yeah. But what's also been a surprise to us recently is, having gone to Jeff's gathering many times, now hosting one of our own, is how many people there actually are that are buying comic art, interested in comic art, how many different styles people are interested in, work that we had never seen before that we weren't familiar with. Some of it we like, some of it we don't. But there's a little more than we were ever aware of in terms of interest. And in the early days, as you mentioned before there, it was basically the two of us. We didn't know anybody else that was interested or that had art or whatever. We assumed that it had to be out there somewhere, but we weren't in touch with those people. And we don't do social media. We're not overly, interested in that kind of approach. But recently, or more recent years, to find out that there are actually quite a few people around has been a wonderful experience. We've ended up hosting, I think you'd seen some of the pictures from our couple of gatherings we've had recently. Well,
Rich Danny sent me a few photos or things. Yep.
Yeah. But that's been a very positive experience, getting everybody together and seeing a whole bunch of different styles of art, different portfolios, and things that people are interested in. And a few deals have been struck here and there where somebody's had something they, not for us yet, but that other people were willing to let go of. That's been quite good. But you went to this past year.
And that was a great show. Very much appreciate you putting that on. And it was a lot of fun. Met some new people there, two friends from Michigan now, and they're coming back, and so am I. So it's going to be great. We're really looking forward to it. And again, there's a social aspect to all of this too that you can't poo-poo. The art is definitely the thing, but getting together, telling stories, sharing,
finding out what people have,
and cataloging it. So
exactly,
right. And what did you say your name was again?
Yes. Yeah. No. I know exactly how that goes, and that's it. Knowledge is power in our hobby too, right? At the end of the day, I think you can never, you can never not know enough collectors, and and just knowing side stories. I mean, because usually if you could help out a collector one way or another because you happen to know who owns a piece,
right?
Then that collector is bound somewhere down the road, if they're a nice person, most of us are, to help you out too. So. The networking side of things is incredibly important, and even before we did OAX, I hosted a few art get-togethers in different places because and I know you mentioned Jeff Singh. There was the Cherry Blossom thing in Delaware, I believe, that was held regularly by Chuck Costas. Those things are very, very important. And kind of keep the hobby moving forward, and OAX was just kind of a no-brainer because our goal is really to kind of expose original art collecting to more collectors, newer collectors, bring people into the hobby, get people to kind of cross-pollinate, get some other people interested in illustration art. That's why we're going to have a little bit, a few more illustration artists there in year 2, but we hope to have at least one sculptor, who does work, maybe in the sideshow kind of realm. We want people to start thinking outside of the box and not just be totally focused on, just the pen and ink, work. That there's so much more out there. And I don't know. That's my long-term goal with it. But it's the networking and the camaraderie that comes with it that really makes it enjoyable.
And the auctions are a wonderful thing in their own way, but I think it's good to be able to have a personal experience where you've got the choice of things on somebody's table to buy or not buy, and you can decide whether the price is for you or not for you, maybe cut a bit of a deal, that kind of thing. There's a lot of value to that, and to getting to know people as well who are going to maybe have something in the future that you're going to want. Otherwise, the auctions are largely a case of who's got the deepest pockets. That's what it boils down to.
And by and large, you don't know who those people are, because
it's not us. I know that much.
You know, we ask ourselves that all the time after we do a recap on a signature auction. It's like, where did that Ditko go? You know, it's like, it's not going to end up on CAF, or when something just goes for much more than you think it should. I don't know where those pieces are going. I mean, it's good to know that they're valued like they are, but it just shows you that there's a lot more collectors out there that aren't social, and that's part of art collecting in general, right? I mean, fine art collectors are probably I don't think there's a fine art fans out there, like that, and there's probably good reason for it, but fortunately we're in a hobby that is still in its infancy, still has affordable pieces in it, and people are open to share and have discourse about it in ways that they have no trepidation with it, at least many of us. And I think that I think that's one of the things that attracted me to the hobby too, really.
No, it's a lot of fun. And for coming up on 45 years, Neil and I have talked about it often. We can't imagine not having done this and having this as part of our lives. It sounds melodramatic, but it's been wonderful.
I know for people who don't collect, they don't really grasp that notion. But for us, it's not strictly just the desire to own things or anything like that. It's to enjoy the things that you have, to enjoy it for what it is and what it means to you, and just actually looking at it. We have had a few phases where we've sort of gotten disillusioned with not winning things, or prices have gone beyond us, where you kind of forget how much you've got to look at, and you don't do it. You end up glazing past it when you walk by in a huff because you didn't win the next piece that you were hoping for. So we have made a bit of a conscious effort over the years to really stop sometimes, to stand back and enjoy what we do have, partly from the just visual aspect, but also too from the amount of fun that we've had out of just doing it and being involved in collecting.
Yeah, it's been a great ride, and it's not over yet.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. There's new artists to discover.
Yeah.
And that's I think it was kind of in some of the notes that we had, but I think that's something that a lot of collectors today enjoy. When art becomes unaffordable, you're always looking for the next talent, right? Somebody whose work really speaks to you, that you want to go out and purchase, and there's a lot of that. There's a lot of so many new artists coming into the comic art and illustration art worlds that have yet to kind of establish markets for themselves, and you kind of get to be a part of that, which is also kind of fun. When you see artists, that's like with Jay, you were talking earlier, probably you feel like he's a little undervalued, but there's a lot of undervalued artists out there, and you kind of got to start somewhere. And
it's okay when you're still looking to buy. You just want it to go up massively before you sell yours.
Right, exactly. That's very, very true.
One of the few downsides, though, to I think some of the newer work is that you do have some people, particularly in the illustration field, working strictly digitally. And then there isn't really an original, even if you're talking about these prints that they're doing that we're going to call the original art kind of thing. You don't have that same tactile piece to hold in your hands to look at, which I think is very unfortunate for a lot of artists who are working that way. Not that there's anything wrong with the platform in terms of the art itself, but you don't have that subsequent legacy of being able to sell the actual pieces.
I mean, it makes perfect sense as a graphic designer, or for production. Especially when the client decides to change things on you, it's a lot easier to go in, open the file up, and make a change, as opposed to the 3 horses you painted. Now we need 4,
or worse yet, 2.
Well, some of it's speed too. I remember a very well-known artist that a lot of people collect. When they switched to digital, it was because they could get the work done faster and spend more time with their family, and that was that was what was important to them. And if the aftermarket sales aren't needed at that point in your career, I completely get that. I mean, time is very challenging to find these days, in our lives, and so I can respect some of those decisions. And some of the artists do it because they can do 2 books in a month rather than one,
Yeah.
right? And so they make the extra money that way. So, I mean, my kids are all working on computers for their art and their animation and things, and it's
There's no avoiding it to some degree. Yeah.
they still pick up a sketchbook, right? But it's who knows where we'll be, 30 or 40 years from now. But
luckily, we personally will be gone by then, and we won't have to worry about it. So we're okay with it.
Live on. That's the thing.
We're okay with it now.
Yeah.
So,
Well, listen, guys, this has been a lot of fun.
Yes.
And I'm glad we agreed to do this. I think people are going to really enjoy this when they get the chance to see it.
Great.
Whenever I get that date out there. But I appreciate you both taking the time today. So whose home are we at? I know you told me. But
We're in my basement.
Yeah.
All right.
I live 10 minutes away, so it's not exactly a giant
But you still have that internet connection from 10 years ago, right? When you
No,
were cables to come through.
Eventually, there was no choice but to upgrade, so I did end up whether I wanted to or not. But so we're okay on those lines now.
But thanks again for asking, Bill. We've enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it. Again, I appreciate sharing your collections on CAF for I think almost 15 years now. Again, that really is what's made CAF what it is the fact that there are collectors like yourselves who want to share their passion for the hobby and their love of their own collections enough to share it with other people. And it's what's kept CAF relevant over 20 years of its existence, which could have easily been steamrolled by social media platforms and other things. But I think people appreciate what CAF's done. And again, I can't thank the both of you enough for continuing to share your collected works with everyone.
And we thank you for the CAF experience as well. And
it's a great
it is a wonderful platform. So
yeah.
Well, thank you very much. We have an app coming out soon. It's gonna if you've ever wanted to look at CAF on your phone.
Talking to the wrong guy here. But,
hey, I was the wrong guy too.
I'll listen.
All right. Well, for like 4 years, I said we didn't need one. I'm like, no. What collector wants to view the site on their phone, right? But boy, I'll tell you, now that I can, it's a little bit surprising how because it's not out there yet, but I have a beta of it. But I think a lot of people are going to be very, very happy with it because CAF was never mobile friendly. Now it's going to be customizable in certain ways and so much easier to browse. The thing is, I hope that it brings newer collectors in. Once we get it out there and it's on the Apple Store or whatever it is, and the Google Play and that kind of thing, and so people can discover our hobby and through that, I think interesting things will come from that.
But it's going to create a problem is that some people are going to say, well, it looked good at 2 inches square, but when I got it, it didn't look as good.
That is true. That is very true.
Well, I'm going to have to buy a bigger phone now.
I don't have a cell phone. I'm the last of the dinosaurs. I'm not going to be doing it.
Oh man, but again, thank you both so much for doing this.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. And again, if there's ever anything I can do for you both, please let me know. And I hope you both can make it to OAX. If not next year, in 2025, somewhere down the road, because it will be an annual show.
Well, I'll be there for sure.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. And again, I appreciate everybody who's watching this after the fact. I hope you got as much out of this as I did. I learned so much every time I get to interview a single collector. And here I've got to discuss collecting original art with a pair of brothers who have been doing it for almost a cumulative of 100 years. That's
we're concurrent.
Getting up there. Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you so much again. I appreciate it. And have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, we did it. There we go.
All right, awesome. No, thank you. That was wonderful.
Yeah, no, it was great.
It was a lot of fun.
Looks like it was about 2.5 hours.